Hello and welcome to another edition of the Kipper stream. Today we have the wonderful Richard Braine. How you doing, Richard?
Very well, very good to see you all. Welcome to everybody watching. It's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Great. I've been following you for a little while, Richard. So you were UKIP's European parliamentary candidate for the London region. I think you first came to my attention from your talk radio appearance, but I've since seen you on a few outlets, including the BBC and round Parliament in your classic bowler hat. First of all, what is it like being a UKIP activist in London?
Well, I'm deep behind enemy lines. So the UKIP activists and members in London are a very happy band. A lot of us, we see each other quite a bit. Last night I was at an event where about I suppose 30 people turned up, many of whom I'd met before and have become friends in the party. I really enjoy the time I spend with UKIP supporters and activists because we are kindred spirits. UKIP people, we often disagree about a lot of things, but all of the UKIP people that I come across are people who think for themselves. They are individuals. They're generally pretty bright, and often very well informed. I learn a lot from them. I enjoy their company. We often have a couple of beers and a laugh, and it's a real pleasure. Much of really the happiest time, many of the happiest times I've had in the last three and a half years have been spent with fellow Kippers, and I really enjoy it.
Do you think there's an extra challenge that comes with being a UKIP activist in London in terms of the hostility you may face there?
Oh, absolutely. And over the last 3.5 years, I have experienced an amazing level of hostility and abuse. And I actually, these days, it's not that I necessarily caught it, but I stand up for my right to, wear a UKIP badge in public. And if people are, funny with me, I try to have a conversation with them and try to, understand where their hatred comes from, first and foremost. I actually was given about 6 months ago a UKIP umbrella by a fantastic activist called Richard Day. And whenever it rains, I look out at the rain, I think, this is a great day. If I'm going out somewhere, I'll take my UKIP brolly. And you can see, it's interesting. Obviously, where I live, probably the most common reaction you see is people kind of wincing and turning away. You can see the disgust and the hatred in their eyes, and it's it's a totally uninformed hatred. And if those people bothered to talk to you for a few minutes, you probably find that they would be pleasantly surprised. But mostly they aren't going to talk to you. Mostly they want to just preserve their hatred so they can enjoy, having someone, to feel negative feelings about. And, they always say, put two Englishmen in a room together and they will immediately set about finding ways to exclude a third. And I think people need that othering. And at the moment, UKIP is a big part of, the othering that goes on, certainly in our media at the moment. We are there's so much disdain towards us. You saw that in all of the interviews that I did during the European parliamentary campaign. So yeah, it's you have to have the spirit of punk about you. You have to go out there feeling like, today I'm Johnny Rotten, and if I disappoint people, so be it, because they all hate me, because that's the job. The job is actually to stand up to people's prejudices and hopefully sometimes to shatter them.
Brilliant. And you spoke about going around your area with your umbrella. You live in Chelsea, right? Did you grow up there as well?
Yes. So I'm a Chelsea boy, man and boy, born and bred. So there seems to be some kind of festivity going on in the street outside at the moment. So you may hear a few car horns going off. It's probably just the nightly punch up between two Uber drivers. Or whatever it is, but
that's all right. It makes a pleasant change from listening to one of our current guests or panel guests, Richard, who constantly we have to deal with seagulls. So it makes a nice change.
He lives in Cornwall.
Seagulls are a nuisance, aren't they? Yeah. not just in the sounds they make, but the other emissions too. Anyway, so I'm from Chelsea. I am in the parlance of this the book. I can't remember the author who wrote the book recently about somewhere people and anywhere people. I am definitely a somewhere person. I'm from Chelsea. I've got nowhere else. Basically on and off, but pretty much my whole life I've lived here. I mean, in my 20s, I lived further afield. I went to university and so on. But basically, yeah, I'm a Chelsea boy, born and bred. So I'm deep behind enemy lines. My MP said that this was the most Europhile borough in the country, and he was the borough manager for Stronger In during the referendum, and I was the borough manager for Vote Leave and Grassroots Out. And I was I really enjoyed the moment at the count at Kensington Chelsea Town Hall at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, when I saw him walking out in disgust, and our group were all there with big grins on our faces as we saw the national results rolling in, and it became increasingly clear that we were going to win it by a decent margin, and there was nothing to worry about. And we got, in my borough, 31.3% voted Leave. And considering there are so many EU citizens that live here in Chelsea, South Kent, Kensington, actually, I was really pleased with that result. 31.3%, very nearly a third of Chelsea denizens, inmates, actually voted for Leave. So I was thrilled with that. And there were several boroughs that were down in the kind of 20 to 25% range. I think Wandsworth and Lambeth, for instance, and so I was very pleased. In fact, Chelsea and Kensington got the second highest Leave vote of all central London boroughs. We came in second after Tower Hamlets. Tower Hamlets, obviously having a very high Pakistani population, was really the strongest Leave supporting borough in central London.
So why do you think you were able to get such a good result in Chelsea then, compared to the other central London regions?
That's difficult to say. I mean, Fulham and Hammersmith got, I think, 31%, which was very close. And I think City of London, City and Westminster got, I think just under 31%. So our neighbouring boroughs heading in the southwest direction actually came very close. So I'm not claiming that our activities made a huge difference. And there seems to have been a slice of London heading out from the centre towards the southwest, where London boroughs did a bit better for leaving than elsewhere. I think up in Islington, it was pretty dire.
Yeah.
And, in fact, most of sort of central and more central London areas. So but we did campaign really hard, and we put out. I raised, I think, about nearly £10,000, which was the personal limit, and we made nearly 500,000 leaflets we put out. And in the last week, we were sending leaflets out to Sunderland and Plymouth and Liverpool, and people were requesting the leaflets that we had made. One of the reasons why we designed our own leaflet and produced them in quantity was because Vote Leave weren't really supplying adequate leaflets, and Grassroots Out leaflets were badly designed and a failure of communication because they didn't say Leave on the front, which is a big error. And then the Vote Leave ones, they had not a bad red one that was a folder, 5-page one, but they wouldn't supply them in quantity. I waited 5 weeks, I think, for my first batch of those leaflets to come. So we really were starved, and there were several other instances where I think I found Vote Leave pretty well, to me at least, surprisingly unhelpful to the cause. And so that's why we printed 500,000 of our own leaflets. We also printed 30,000 car and taxi stickers, and we did 1,000 billboard posters around small B3, so sort of fly posting, like band promotion type posters around West and North and South London. So we worked really hard. And we spent the money and we got great donors, and we got a great vibe in our campaign group. And I think it was really satisfying for the campaign group to get out there, to canvass, to get the leaflets out, and to do the best we could to make sure that we took the chance available.
Well, one of the things I wanted to touch on, which we spoke about previously, is I remember you said Chelsea used to have a very Bohemian culture to it, and that's how that's changed over the years. So how was the culture back then when you were growing up, and how do you think that affected you in terms of how you view the world?
That's an interesting question. It's very difficult for me to say because, you know, we only live one life, and it's almost impossible to measure, you know, what aspects of your life and the decisions you make are determined by the character you're born with and what you grow into. But certainly back when I was a child, so I was born in '68, and my mother was a health service GP here in Chelsea, and so it was very rock and roll back then. You know, there was a guy in the early '70s who had a shop, I think a sort of furniture shop full of cool furniture that he was bringing in from, I don't know, Marrakesh and Kabul probably. And he had a lion, and the lion used to sit in the window. And, you know, it grew and it got bigger, and it would still sit in the window of his shop.
Wait, are you talking about a real? Are you talking about a real lion here?
Yeah, a real lion, like a lion. Okay, an actual lion. And you know, people's dog would come into the shop with their dogs, you know, and there'd be a bit of sniffing around and a bit of a sort of, you know, some. I don't think they had too many fracas. I think the lion behaved reasonably well, but it got to the size. You know, people would walk past the shop and look in the window and see the lion in there, and presumably imagine that it was stuffed. And then it would kind of just look up at them, and they kind of jump off the pavement. And you know, you know, so people would actually go into this shop. I mean, that's but when the lion got, I think the lion got too big, and he had to send it back to Africa. I think there may have been one or two complaints. I'm not sure what were you can look up the history of this. It's really well documented. Actually, I think the guy who the shop belonged to still lives on the World's End estate, just, you know, a few hundred yards from me here. And so I think he's still around. But, you know, there were, you know, all of that era, the whole kind of, you know, the Beatles wearing caftans. And, you know, I'm very, very close to Vivienne Westwood's shop, which is still there. And it's one of the last shops from that era, from the '70s anyway, that's still there. And that is the shop in which the Sex Pistols, or above which the Sex Pistols were formed. And she was going out with Malcolm McLaren, and he had previously managed, I think it was the New York Dolls, was it? Was it Television or one of those sort of early, you know, New York punk bands. And, you know, so that's where that history happened. I mean, the house that I live in, you know, back then in the '80s, my sisters had parties where, you know, members of the Clash would come to the party. You know, it was, so that whole rock and roll era was such a really extraordinary time for music, right through from, you know, the '70s, the '80s, and to some extent the '90s. I mean, in the '90s, you started to feel that things were spreading a bit, but really, I think the property prices made this area into really just part of a lot of people's investment portfolios. And there's been a very large number of people trying to get their money out of, for example, some of the Islamic countries, North Africa, Middle East, and so on, and elsewhere around the world, of course, and you know, hedging their bets, spreading their portfolios. And London property has been a big target. Chelsea itself has been a very big target for that. There's been a huge amount of building basements and second basements and all of that. So yeah, the property prices, I think, have made the area really much more to do with, you know, oligarchs and people who work in finance, and, you know, people who work in property, and people who work in all kinds of highly lucrative areas. And the consequence is that there's no young people left, and there are no artists left, and all the cool old shops have shut down. And now, if you look at the shops up and down the King's Road these days, it's, you know, you've got a combination of the sorts of things that you see in an airport lounge at, I don't know, Gatwick or Heathrow, and then a lot of really weird places like I don't know, Anthropology, that, you know, is a place that is obviously, you look at it, you can see it's really only of interest to the mistresses of Russian you know, tycoons and oligarchs. So the character has certainly been damaged. I think, well, to my mind, it's damaged because the vibe isn't there. It's not a fashionable place anymore. It's a wealthy place, but it's sort of it's lost its feeling of freedom, of expression, of bohemianism, and maybe to some extent, the excitement, and that's gone. Maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just getting old.
Do you think that's maybe a natural consequence of, young people and artists breathing life into places that will ultimately attract people who are just there to enjoy themselves and make money? And is that an inevitable process where you'll never get a place which, constantly has that energy, really?
I don't know about that. It's an interesting question whether there is some kind of, a cultural resonance that makes places go in and out of fashion at some hitherto undisclosed frequency. But so I can't say. And I would love to see the Chelsea that I grew up in return, because it was a very, very vibrant and fun and exciting place. I don't feel that it's like that anymore. These days, to be honest, when I go down to places like Clapham, when I go to Borough, I feel that buzz and young people, and there's a vibe, and it's exciting. And so it's still here in London in lots of different places, but it's not where I live anymore. So I suppose I feel it's a bit of nostalgia really for me when I go to those places and I see that they still have a bit of a buzz. So maybe it will return, but I don't see how it can return with the current property prices, because I don't see how young people are going to be able to get back in here unless they're spending vast sums of their probably their daddy's money, because not many 20-year-olds have got that kind of bread to burn.
Yeah. There are some places actually like Shoreditch which seem to be they seem to have some young energy and interesting things going on, but I do largely agree with what you're saying there.
Oh yeah, I mean Shoreditch, I can remember when Hoxton became incredibly fashionable quite over a period of a decade or so. I'm friends with a reasonably well-known actor called Don West, and he spotted that Hoxton was an interesting place and bought a house there. And I think he must have done pretty well out of that, because he was in before it became really fashionable, and was still there when it was really fashionable. And now, of course, you're looking at a lot of places further out, and I think it's where youngsters, and particularly bright youngsters and fashionable youngsters, I think where you have a top level art college, you get a congregation around there and you get a bit of a buzz. The graffiti is better, more intellectual. I remember seeing a TV screen under an arch somewhere. It was just a simple box, with a sort of circuit with a round thing in it, and a little aerial and some legs, and it just said on the screen, "Consume, be silent, die." And you want quality graffiti like that. Oops. Sorry, there goes my phone. Yeah, you want quality graffiti like that, and we haven't seen enough of that around here recently. So I remember on the King's Road, you used to see these stencils sprayed on the pavestones, which just said the, and the was not just the greatest band name ever, but also the logo type for it, with a small the and then a big the, and the way it was drawn and put together. It was, I think, possibly the greatest band name and logo ever. I don't know if it will ever be surpassed. And it used to just be sprayed on the paving stones all around here. And these days, I'm not sure we see that kind of style so much in Chelsea anymore. It's all been cleaned up a bit.
I love the idea of a UKIP candidate commenting on the quality of graffiti.
Yeah, I mean, when you see wonderful graffiti, I mean, last time I saw graffiti that really, really inspired me was down in Brighton, actually, a couple of years ago. And there was someone who'd gone around doing really amazing graffiti on, I think they were the British Telecom, metal boxes where they have all the switching, the copper, the last 100 yards copper connectors. You see them on the streets, and he'd done some just beautiful things on that. I mean, when I see graffiti, that I love, it's uplifting. The problem is, of course, that you have to accept that there's an awful lot of really boring, ugly, stupid graffiti as well. And it's a shame that we don't just keep the good stuff up.
I've just noticed we've had our resident Christian of YI, Richard Cunningham, join us. Hello, Richard.
Good to see you.
So maybe this is a good time to talk about your Catholicism, Richard. What does religion mean to you?
Wow, well, this is a big subject, and in politics, you're not really supposed to talk about it very much. I mean, I am someone who, I suppose, came back to. Oh, sorry, do you mean me or the other Richard?
Oh no, I meant you.
Don't worry about me, buddy.
Okay. Sorry. So I suppose I came back to my Catholicism. I was brought up Catholic, but I didn't go to Catholic schools. And in my sort of teenage years, I was a typical, dirty teenage boy. I was really squalid. There was basically one thing on my mind, like most boys at that age, as
well,
they go through that. Well, and then so in my what's that?
It's definitely fine art or architecture or something like that. You must have enjoyed brutalism or something like that. Some kind of horrible architectural style.
Yeah, actually, I did. There's, my favorite building in London was the one that's just been demolished at Vauxhall, which also was a British Telecom building. And if you can find pictures of it, it was the most superbly ornate piece of brutalism in kind of wrought. I suppose it must have been zinc cladding, and I've got time for that as well, but in its place. But no, I mean, certainly in my 20s, I don't think I had abandoned theism. I did physics and philosophy at university, and it never put a big dent really in, or at least I always kept an open mind. I never became atheist. I mean, in philosophy, I learned one or two interesting arguments against atheism. And so, through my 20s, I largely ignored religion. And I lived my life in a very selfish and I think reprehensible way, which I am certainly ashamed of. But equally, lots of young men do. And so I don't beat myself up too much about it. But I came back to being a churchgoer because I realized that even though my wonderful parents, who always gave me the most incredible advice and support my whole life, I realized that even they are compromised because they can't say to their children, no, and if you never come back, tough. Parents, their weakness is their love and the pressure on them to compromise with their children. And I realized, I suppose, in my early 30s that the church had never done that. The church had always said, no, it's like this. If you don't like it, you can F off. And when you've grown up and when you've realized that, a lot of these moral questions that we bang on about have real responsibilities, then you can, then you'll come back and you'll realize that, we were right and we thought this through over thousands of years, and you'll come back and you'll understand, the fundamental tenets, and you'll recognize. So, we're ready to welcome you back to the church. During Mass, the door at the back of the church is always open. And, that happened to me in my 30s because of experiences that I had. I have a wonderful daughter who's 20, and I wasn't married to her mother. And it was all a very fraught and difficult time for everybody concerned. And I suppose I just learned that the people that had always been careful to give the right advice, no matter how little I wanted to hear it, most importantly, what was the church and the priests. They just said, don't live that way. Don't do it. And I think this issue often gets, I think the church is often misrepresented when, for instance, people talk about the attitude to the distribution of condoms in Africa, for instance. And people misconstrue the church's advice. The church's advice is don't screw around. I mean, if there's one way of not catching AIDS, in Africa, it's don't sleep with people. you can be reasonably sure then, obviously apart from drugs and so on, but that's the safest, one of the safest ways. The idea is meet the right person, devote yourself entirely to that, to that person. Nothing will make you feel better, and you will produce the very best environment for children to be born into, should you be so lucky as to have that happen to you. And so that advice gets misconstrued. I suppose I realized in my 30s that was the source of that advice, which I had flagrantly ignored, and many other areas where I started to think more carefully and philosophically about moral questions. And I think that brought me back to thinking about the church and what it stands for. I don't think the church is perfect by any means. Nobody does. But there's still an enormous and almost inexplicable value in listening very hard to doctrine, understanding how it came to be, understanding the source of it, and understanding how it can make your life better, make you better, and make you into a more responsible person.
That's interesting.
I can completely agree with just about all of that. I think that, I don't know, I'm going to have to disappoint Damien right now and say, as much as he wants me to, I'm not going to go into a full Ian Paisley diatribe against someone's Catholicism. I'm in the Reformed Church myself. I'm a Reformed Baptist. But I can broadly agree with most of what was said there, because when I didn't come to the faith until I was 17. I grew up in a completely irreligious household. And then a couple of years after becoming a baptized Christian, I fell off the wagon in a bad way. I was hitting the town loads more. I developed a cocaine problem for several months. And the thing that actually pulled me back was while I was out on the town in the September of 2016, with a considerable amount of cocaine in my system, I bumped into an old friend of mine from the Christian Union. And she was like, a little birdie tells me that you've been doing drugs. And I said, I won't lie to you, I'm doing them right now. and she just very, very simply turned around and said to me, do you honestly think that this is what God has in mind for your life? Do you honestly think that this was what he planned for you? And I'd like, there are fewer embarrassing things I've done in my life than stand in a car park opposite the one nightclub in Falmouth where everybody is and bawl like a child because I suddenly realized the error of my ways.
Yeah.
So I'm over 2 years clean from the drugs, which is lovely. And it's just, I think what you were talking about with the not handing out condoms in Africa thing. I had this argument with somebody in university actually, because, they're saying, it's irresponsible of the church to not provide contraception. It's only going to lead to the spread of AIDS. And it's all, the argument for it isn't a prohibition of a contraceptive. It's the encouragement of a virtue. Abstinence is a virtue. And that's what the church is there to encourage. It's not to create just a roll cage for when you mess up. It's to just encourage you to be a better person so you don't need that roll cage to begin with.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things, I actually had an instance last Sunday at my evening service. I'm being essentially slowly walked into the process of ministry, which may involve me going into a Reformed seminary in the next few years. And one of the things that they wanted to do was encourage me to, once a month at an evening service, perhaps lead the service or do a sermon. And just the other week, I actually turn around and say to my minister, can we do a rain check on that? I don't think I'm ready to do that yet. There's still a few things in my life from, way back that I still need to address. And so, I think that one of the most beneficial things of the church is not just providing people, with rituals and traditions that bind people together as a community, but it also just encourages a general sense of integrity and virtue that is sorely lacking in our society. And this is quite a pleasant stream actually, because I noticed that of the 3 other people on this stream, the one's a Catholic and 2 of them are agnostic. So I'm not going to have that sort of bite back from the usual atheists in the crowd going, actually, so I'm really appreciating that for once I can get on my soapbox even and just ramble about Jesus for a touch. I appreciate it.
Well, the atheists, I mean, my view is that you can deal with the atheists very quickly because, atheism actually really means a belief that there isn't a God. And, we hear those arguments a lot these days. Oh, science has proven that kind of belief is unnecessary. There's no evidence. Show me any evidence. There never has been any. Those kinds of, we've all heard all of the standard atheist arguments. I was actually introduced to quite an enjoyable anti-atheist argument when I was at university, which is the idea that when you consider the true mystery and scale and unimaginable complexity of this universe, and the question of what caused it, and where it came from, or whether it came from anywhere, does it make sense to think about it coming from somewhere in the first place? When you think about all those questions, the point really is, should there be a prime cause, a creator, a God, whatever you want to call her? Then that's it.
You edgy boy.
I think technically for a Catholic that's a blasphemy, possibly. I'm not sure about that.
You must take 10 Hail Marys.
I'm not sure about that, but the real question is, should there be a cause powerful enough to generate this universe? Then it does raise the question: could that quite unimaginable cause need to take a break at some point? And could such a cause have ability to interlace into time itself, short periods of let's say, I don't know, 70 years or something, just where nothing happened, and the creator was able to just enjoy a reverie, enjoy a little holiday, something a bit different, something a bit like, let's say, being you. An all-powerful being could, even for the sake of a dream, I mean, we all dream, we all have extraordinary experiences in the middle of the night, lying in a bed, completely unaware of where we really are. And, it would seem churlish to deny the all-powerful creative force of this universe simply the ability to dream as we do. So let's imagine that force wished to dream being you, just for a laugh, just to challenge herself, or just to have a totally different experience from being competent and big and everywhere and unimaginable. And so the problem really becomes then, how can you be sure that you aren't God taking a fag break?
I would like to state that I don't smoke.
Whatever other kind of break you like to take. I mean,
it's the creator of the universe allowed a blueberry vape. I don't know.
The problem with this, so the point about this argument is that it introduces, no matter how improbable or and absurd you regard that argument, it introduces the tiny razor sharp thin end of a wedge. Because if you allow any possibility at all to that idea, then it becomes illogical to rule out the existence of a God altogether, because to do so would be to have to rule out yourself. And for most people, at least, that's kind of impossible. I mean, obviously, with a lot of experiences of drugs and so on, some people perhaps have even tried that, but generally, it's the old Cartesian argument, cogito ergo sum, and that's the problem. So I think, and it comes back to the Christian idea that God inheres in every one of us, or not just a Christian idea. I think Buddhism and I mean many religions have this idea that the divine creative force of this universe, is, left his signature and left a part of herself in every single one of us. And it's there, and we can no more deny it or remove it, or and that's why there is this constant annoyance to atheists and perhaps even agnostics, of all these bloody religious people who will not give up banging on about this stupid idea of theism, and why it keeps rearing its head. And if it weren't there, it would go on endlessly inventing itself. I mean, a bit like socialism in a way. The problem with socialism is that no matter how stupid an idea it is, unlike theism, by the way, no matter how stupid an idea it is, a generation after generation keeps on falling for it or reinventing it. This idea that fairness means everybody getting the same size of slice of the cake. And that's the reason, one of the main reasons I think why socialism will never die, no matter how many hundreds of millions of innocent people it slaughters, and no matter how appalling the conditions and the oppression that we've seen throughout the 20th century in almost every, I say almost, in fact, every single socialist society. It's still, no matter how much it's discredited, this utterly bogus idea will not die, because there is a kind of childish, primitive, stupid logic to the idea that everything ought to be fair, and that means equal quantities for whichever unit you choose to use as the basis for your society.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there are 2 points on that. Like, you made a good one, which I'll pick up on. But the way that I view atheism is it's because we had the infamous stream yesterday, which nobody shall ever watch again, thank God. And the topic of atheism did come up briefly. And the way that I view atheism, so I used to be one during my college years, I always see it in a kind of juvenile light, because it always seems the ones that are attracted to it are the ones that just like to rebel against the system. At least that's how it starts off. They're the ones that, like I say, they don't like religion because it's always going on and on. And they just think, well, there's no evidence for it, so why should I care? So their ultimate middle finger to it is to say, you don't exist, nothing about what you represent matters. And that's their ultimate reaction to it. But the thing about atheism, and I made the comparison to it being its own kind of religion in a way, which, some people may disagree with, but the point I make about it is that to be an atheist is that you have to make the conscious choice to reject a belief, to reject the existence of a deity, whether it exists or not. It's not something that you are by default kind of born into. You have to see what the options are and then make the choice to reject it. And I turned away from atheism because it led to way too many plots in the way that we live. Like, if one of the basis issues I have with atheism is that ultimately nothing matters. When you die, you just rot in the ground or whatever. And if that's the case, why do we have memories? If nothing matters, why should we remember anything? And another more basic point, which is, if nothing matters, why do we exist anyway? Like, it's a constant self-defeating idea. And the more I analyzed it, the more I realized it wasn't for me, and that's why I ended up becoming an agnostic. Although, and as Richard said about, glad he's around, in this particular stream, he's around agnostics and those of a religious belief, is that I would consider myself more to be an agnostic spiritualist, whereas I could be proved one way or another whether God exists or he doesn't, or she exists or she doesn't exist. It doesn't matter too much to me, but it makes more sense to me that there is something. That our existence doesn't exist through pure chance. It leaves too many unanswered questions, and too many unanswered questions that atheism is unwilling to talk about. And I'll just finish off with the point you were saying about why socialism keeps coming back, and why atheists may not like religious people. It's the promise. It's the promise of something. It's like the promise of Eden that you'll never actually get to experience. And the pursuit of trying to get to perfection will lead you down into a broken path. And that's why I find that's why socialism is so attractive to people, because it promises so much to people to fix all of their worldly issues. But in the pursuit of that perfection, it screws over absolutely everybody, and it takes no what's the term, prisoners. It will, well, I guess it would do if you want to just throw more in the gulag. But but it's an absolutely unforgiving ideology. And I think that's ultimately why it keeps coming back. And you get those like religious zealots that will come back. It's the promise of something better than what they have. And it's the call, it's their pursuit of trying to get to that causes all the issues.
I think that's quite interesting. I mean, I agree with everything that the both of you have just said, apart from the referring to God in the feminine, which sets my teeth. You heretics!
It worked.
But no, I completely agree. And actually, I think that one of the interesting things is that this.
Sorry, Richard, can I just quickly interject there? I didn't refer to God in the feminine. I used the word her and she in its masculine sense.
Of course, yes, of course. For all we know that God might be feminine, but identifying.
Well, I also quite often say he and his when I'm talking about a woman. I have no problem doing that, and I'm quite happy to say she or hers about a man as well. So just wanted to clarify that. Carry on.
Yeah, there we go. Surely, if the creator of the universe is allowed to have a fag break, then he or she is allowed to transition as well. We, after all, live in the 21st century. But no, so I think one of the interesting things is actually that to a certain extent, Scripture actually addresses this idea of sort of the rabbit hole of atheism, which is essentially, if there's no point, there's no greater purpose, then what's the point of doing anything? The Ecclesiastes really takes this head on, and I'm not sure who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. I don't think it's confirmed that the identity of the person who wrote it, although I believe it's attributed to Solomon. I'm not sure. But essentially the whole thrust of Ecclesiastes is without God, there's no point in doing anything. So if you only end up reading the first half of Ecclesiastes, you can get really, really depressed because it's kind of like essentially nihilism before Nietzsche made it popular. And it's just this incredibly horrible, gritty sort of what is the point of doing anything if we're just going to die and rot in the ground after that? Obviously, Ecclesiastes finishes on a very, very triumphal note as well. It's okay because God is real and he cares about us and he's invested in our lives and the livelihood of our people. Therefore, rejoice and keep up the good work.
That's right. Can I just interject that that's also pretty much the model of what Descartes did in the Meditations, perhaps less successfully. But there's another interesting thing that you've brought attention to here, which is that Richard Dawkins got in trouble quite recently because he said that some religions are better than others, and at that point, the whole Dawkins atheism, conspiracy goes straight down the lavatory because. By virtue of what are some religions better than others? And I think this is the problem with his. I think he really should never have got into, the theological area because he's phenomenally ignorant in philosophy, and metaphysics and.
Well, he was anti-Brexit as well, so you can't really.
Well, there you go. What do you expect? What do you expect?
As far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to go. God supported Brexit. However,
you never know, man.
I'm just saying. In the Book of Acts, I believe it's chapter maybe 26, verse 17, something like that, or 17, verse 26, and it talks about how God from one flesh made all nations and ordained the sizes of their living spaces and things like that. Literally, God ordained borders.
That's it. But you say that God wasn't involved in the referendum, but we did win.
That's true.
Despite what all the polls were saying.
And at the end of the day, the majority of the faithful voted for Brexit as well. I know that there aren't many metrics that we can pull, but was it 60% of Anglicans voted for Brexit? I think a similar number of evangelicals voted for Brexit. And I'm not sure what the statistics are about Catholics voting for Brexit because they're papists. However, I'm led to believe.
but against the advice of their priests, in many cases in the Anglican Church, But there's two things that have just been raised that I would try to say a very quick word about. The first one is, that even really good popes are to some extent agnostics, because there has never been a pope that hasn't had doubts. Doubts are part of faith. That the waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, wondering if everything really is made of nothing after all. Well, everything is made of nothing, and as the aphorism says, sometimes the nothingness shows through. So that's part of that. We have to remember that faith is a sort of ongoing struggle. But the second thing that you brought up is that talking about this you broached this, or nearly broached the subject of nihilism and the question of whether things have meaning, and whether that has a bearing on theism. And I always remember, this idea to some extent comes from C.S. Lewis as well, whose dog died when he was 10, and that turned him into a rabid atheist. And I remember someone saying, how can, I think it was actually Richard Dawkins' argument, in fact, how can there be a God when there's a kind of worm that infects children in Africa, and was it? And it gets into their eyes, and it goes across the backs of their eyes, and it eats their eyeballs and makes them blind. And how can this world be created by a good creator if something that appalling can happen? And my answer to that is that you're just not looking at it from the worm's point of view. Right?
That's kind of the point I was just thinking of.
That good and bad, we have to view it in the human realm, with all our frailties and the pain and horror and suffering that life inevitably involves. And so we have this, I think a lot of people have this idea that somehow if God had created there can't be a God, because a real God would have created a perfect world, and of course a perfect world can never change in any way at all, because it would only be able to change from being perfect to imperfect, and that would then shatter the whole dream. So a perfect world would essentially be a crystal, or some kind of steady state perfect plasma that permeated the entire universe in its perfection. And of course, if you hold that next to the real universe with all of its pitfalls and troubles and clashes of galaxies and even our own tiny little lives, that world where you suffer enormously your whole life, but one day you smell the smell of a bonfire on the wind in the springtime, then that world with all the pain and suffering and change and dynamism and choices and free will and the smell of bonfires is better than the perfect world. The genius of the creator was to allow evil, to allow badness, to allow the things that we hate and fear, and to therefore imbue the world with this never-ending, I say never-ending, hopefully ending, because hopefully it ends for each of us in on the palm of the creator, in the sunshine of his love. But so that's the idea that somehow there can't be a God because there are things wrong with the world. It's quite the opposite. That's actually I did physics and philosophy at university, and when you start to look more carefully at a lot of the more difficult physics, and you start looking at things like Planck's constant and the inexplicability and the mystery of it, and Dawkins has his answer, which is, oh well, anything that wasn't like this disappeared. But the point that I think he's missed is that even this might not have existed. I mean, if you're a real nihilist, you could say there could have just been nothing. There could have just been nothing. And so it's not enough. That argument isn't enough if you want to address the mystery and beauty of existence of this universe. I'm getting a bit lyrical here. Let's move on.
Well, I just wanted to say that sort of, I again completely agree. Funnily enough, the two religious guys in the chat agree on matters of religious philosophy. But you know, I also I appreciate the C.S. Lewis reference. I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, but there's a couple of things that he wrote. I believe it was in Surprised by Joy, that which is a story of essentially his coming to God. That sort of really resonated strongly in my own life. Firstly, when he said that he was an atheist, he wrote that he didn't believe in God. Sorry, he didn't believe that God existed, and he was really angry at God because he didn't exist. Right. And that was the first one. And then the second one was when he finally came to believe that there must have been some kind of God. And this was after sort of months, maybe even years of wrestling with the concept and being really quite disappointed that all of his atheistic arguments weren't working in his favor. He said that alone in his dorm room one like horrible night, he knelt down and prayed, the most miserable man in England. And I completely sympathize with that, because when I can remember the first time I genuinely prayed, and I was raging drunk. I was drunk and angry, and I'd had a falling out with my mates while out on the lash, and I was just suddenly hit with this incredible feeling of sort of like, you know, man, this is not good. You know, my family were going through some real financial troubles. It looked like we were going to be, you know, threatened with homelessness for the second time in my life before turning 18. So that was always fun. And I was just there going like, and this is what I've got to show. I've just spent my entire summer outside of college working, and I've spent all of my money on alcohol and fags. And the first time I sat on a park bench near my local, where I grew up in Essex, and I prayed, literally just said, right, God, I don't even know if you're there, but if you're there, can you please just tell me that there's something more than this? You know, just sort of, you know, growing up in a small town where everybody knows who you are, spending all of your spare time drinking, and just sort of never really achieving anything. And lo and behold, you know, I had one Christian mate who you know, always left the light on for me, would always help me talk through these different things. You know, got to the point where sort of he knew that I felt uncomfortable talking about anything if I wasn't talking about it in a pub. So I mean, he would just bring the Bible into a pub and be like, right, okay, we're going to hash this one out, and it was really, really great. And so, yeah, like God did prove that there was more to life. You know, first and foremost, he helped my family with the finances, you know, and got us out of that particular rut. You know, managed to get me to university. So I went from worrying if I was going to have a house to, you know, worrying if I was going to pass my first year, you know, which is a considerable jump in expectations. Yeah. And it's just, you know, sort of that every time where I have started to doubt and I've started to worry, God has always shown through. And I think that, again, scripture provides brilliant examples of that. I would recommend anybody read the Psalms when David is absolutely going ballistic at God, going, God, why have you let this happen? Why is this happening? I'm surrounded by my enemies. Everybody's trying to attack me. I'm living in a cave, and I've got the king of Judah like sending men out to kill me. You know, this is the worst possible situation that a man could ever be in, and yet you are still God, and yet you still have a plan for my life. It's just, it's some of the most beautiful parts of scripture is a man expressly showing his doubts. So yeah, basically, checkmate atheists. Henry VIII was the first Brexiteer. Catholicism is the EU prototype. Sorry, am I triggering enough yet?
Well, one point I want to quickly make when you were talking about your mate coming to the pub with a Bible is that don't forget that Christ did choose to be celebrated not just with bread but also with wine, and we shouldn't forget that you know, that of course moderation in all things is sensible. Indeed. But we shouldn't try to be too perfect. I remember a couple of years ago, approaching Lent, a priest, a Catholic priest, giving a sermon, and he said, you know, whatever you give up for Lent, make sure that it's impossible. and he said, because, you know, it's much better that you decide that you're going to try to do something that's impossible and you fail, because there's nothing worse than smug people going around after Easter saying how strong and clever and disciplined and holy they are, for having actually succeeded in giving up whatever it was for Lent. So, make sure that you set the bar high and that you come to terms with your failure actually to do it.
I give up things for Lent as well, but like it's it's not even big impossible things that I struggle with though, and that's kind of, I think, part of the innate beauty of it. I can remember so for the last 2 years I give up 3 things for Lent. I give up smoking. This year I just elected to drop the smoking and pick up a vape. Drop alcohol, which I don't struggle too much with anyway. I like a drink, but I can leave it. The third one was the most surprising one that I thought really wouldn't get to me and did, was fizzy orange. I have a fizzy orange addiction. And I remember once I was in a shop, I completely forgot about it, and I bought a San Pellegrino blood orange fizzy drink. And then I walked out, went to open it. I was like, wait, hang on, does blood orange count as orange? And I was arguing with myself about, am I crossing any red lines here? And I just suddenly went like, how pathetic is this? Like, I'm trying to worm my way out of this really sort of insignificant thing.
That is a good drink, though, to be fair.
Yeah, but then just thinking about it, it's sort of like, man, I am getting so wound up about the most insignificant thing in the world, and yet God still loves me.
You know when you've been tangod.
On that bombshell, we've got to move on.
Well, yeah.
I was about to ask, since we're talking about religion at the moment, did you want to move on to the topic of Islam, Damon?
Well, let's touch on that later, actually, because I want to get a few words in on Brexit, since we are the original party of Brexit.
OG Brexit gang.
So yep. It's looking like Boris Johnson is almost inevitably going to be Tory leader. Would you agree with that?
Who's answering me?
Yeah, sorry, that's you, Richard.
Well, I'm not sure. Don't forget that I'm old enough to remember when John Major became became a prime minister, a Tory leader, and about 2 weeks before that, nobody had ever heard of him. And all of the big, there were big people that were expected to win it. There was Heseltine and Hurd, and there were lots of big heavyweights in the Tory party at that time. And this guy seemed to come from almost nowhere. And so I would say, don't count on anything. If you look at the news that we've had over the last couple of days, I think it's an indication of how fragile, frankly, any Brexiter, and I'm not even sure that Boris is a Brexiter at all. His sister isn't, his 2 brothers aren't, his father isn't, and it's well known that he was in 2 minds, and he's said a great many things about this subject for both sides, admittedly. But so, the point really is that we have to recognize that we have an entrenched Remain establishment in this country, and they are going to cling on to this terrible Napoleonic dream for dear life. Then they're not going to give it up. And even if we do manage to Brexit properly, they won't go away. They're still going to keep campaigning for us to go back into this totalitarian empire. And so, I look at Boris at the moment. Will he win with the membership? Probably, but we don't know what they're going to throw at him over the next, couple of weeks. And it's pretty obvious from the last few days that, the full powers of this society, establishment, state, whatever you want to call it, are ranged against him. And, to be honest, even if he survives the onslaught and does become our prime minister, I'm still very, very wary of him. I'm very nervous of him. I'm very concerned that we're going to get some, halfway ill-conceived deal and not really get back our true national independence, where we are free from laws made in a foreign country, where we're free from the European courts of justice, where we are, properly free from all the limitations and frustrations and, frankly, humiliations that the European Union is so good doling out to its poor, unsuspecting member states. So that's how I feel about it. I don't put a huge amount of hope or trust in Boris really delivering it.
No, I think that's a really fair point as well to make, because unfortunately it is anyone's game, sadly, still. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was, so happy when Rory Stewart got knocked out of it, because I mean that guy is just deep state as anything. So I was really, really happy when he got the boot. But yeah, we just have this really horrible option where it's like our next prime minister could be Jeremy Hunt, and actually does stand a very feasible chance of being the next prime minister. And it's horrific. I mean, as much as it kind of grates me that the one person that I think we're going to have to rely on to get the Brexit we want is Boris Johnson. If that's the hand that we've been dealt, and we're going to have to play with it. I mean, it's. I just find it so difficult, and I think that's really why, sort of looking at UKIP, we're really going to have to change our game. When it comes to this sort of thing, because obviously, if hope upon hopes, Boris Johnson does win, and we get to the 31st of October, nothing has been decided, and we leave on a no deal. Where does that leave us? All of a sudden, we've already seen our primary, USP has been stolen by the Brexit party. And yes, we are the original party of Brexit, but then, what remains? I think that there's still, a strong case for a national populist voice in the UK. But we've really got to find out a way to make that work. Because I think that whatever happens, the fallout of the Conservative leadership contest is going to directly affect our vote in places where we used to be strong, because in the South, where we used to pick up lots of Brexiteer Tory votes, if Boris wins, they're all going to come flooding back. The question is, what do we do if, say, Jeremy Hunt wins and we end up going past the 31st of October, or indeed if he wins and we still wind up with this kind of bizarre situation where we end up getting a Brexit and we no longer have our primary pull. So yeah, I think that we need to really be looking at ourselves in the following months and years, really, about where our place is in British politics and how we can better secure it. I think that's going to be the main question, I think, on everyone's minds, at least in the past.
Because I did bring that up when I was at my I say when I was at, but when I conference called, because I was on holiday last week, to my committee branch, or the committee in my branch. And I basically said exactly what Richard just said, like, we need to not be quite so worried about, the Brexit pie and things like that, but we need to be looking inwards and reflecting on how we should be pushing forwards and what would be the best way to stick to our core values and embrace new ones that the other pies just aren't doing at the moment, and where we can pick up the slack where other pies are failing. And there's a lot of slack that we can pick up from Labour, considering how many of their previous members that they've betrayed.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say that's something that Eric's commented on previous streams. You obviously know Eric Jothy pretty well because he helped you with your campaigns, didn't he, Richard?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Eric's a fantastic chap. I get on really well with him, and he came to one of my BBC interviews during the European parliamentary campaign, and we sneaked off to the pub afterwards for a little half pint, and we did a selfie and tweeted it, the two of us in the pub, and Eric put Boomer Millennial Alliance. And it's fantastic to hear so much good sense coming from someone of his age. Eric's 21, and he's so switched on. I love listening to him. He knows so much stuff that I don't know. I'm learning from him. I shouldn't think he's learning very much from me, but it's really great to see youngsters in the party. We really, I'm 51. I really appreciate the fact that youngsters are coming through and they've understood and taken on board the arguments that we, UKIP as a party, has been making for 27 years now. And they've understood that it actually matters, that you belong to a country that has self-government and self-determination and these crucial rights to be represented politically in a democracy. And so that's really, really exciting.
I would say that when you say you're learning more from him than what he may be learning from you, I wouldn't necessarily take that to heart, because honestly, like, I've learned far more from the older generations when especially when I joined UKIP. I didn't and I went to my first branch meeting. I knew nothing. I just went in there completely blind, not knowing what I was expecting. And I've learned so much about the inner workings of the political system, and just learning more of the history of British politics from those who have lived in that. And I bet probably Eric, spending time with you, probably got the same thing. It's the experience from the older generation that the young relish, and we absolutely treasure it.
Can I just
Millennial Alliance.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I just interject there and say that for anyone who doesn't know Eric, he is someone who has a crazy sort of style. I don't really know how to describe him, but
he's UKIP's resident hipster.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's been on our stream a few times with the funky hair.
Yeah, and he bright blonde hair. You know, he has an original style, put it that way. And you would not think typically someone like him would join UKIP, but it does seem in more recent times we are attracting more people like that, more people who are slightly more alternative.
And also, just to say now that this has become a bit of an Eric praising stream, I can very much agree with what Richard has been saying, because I went up to Bristol for a barbecue with him and the deputy chairman of Young Independents, George Pykov, and it was very much just sort of a very, very sort of interactive guy, very easy to have a conversation with, but also just armed to the teeth with obscure knowledge that sort of is actually quite helpful. And I appreciate, he's very much appreciated, and also Richard, I might as well tell you, he speaks very highly of you also, so I dare say that you both learn equally from one another.
But I've been on the street with him, sort of canvassing, chatting to people, and I'm standing next to a guy who's wearing a pink denim cowboy suit with bleached blonde hair, and he's got some really cool shades, some really cool sunglasses on, and you would swear, I mean, anybody in this country would swear that he was a fanatical lefty just looking at him. And then when you talk to him, it's such a kind of a sucker punch when you talk to him, and he's so clued up, and he's very committed to the cause, and he despises the discredited left, and the ongoing cultural Marxist destruction of this country and other countries, and he's very clued up on it. And so it's you've got an old geezer like me, trying to look relatively smart in a suit and proper shoes and so on, trying to look like politicians are supposed to look, and Eric's there, being the dude, and it's like good cop. It's sort of good cop, bad cop. People come up, they take their pick which one, but we've got them either way. It's a pincer movement.
Well, there was a very
it's going to be Blonde and Grey, the new TV show.
Yeah, there was a very funny story that came out of the Young Independents conference last year. Sadly, I wasn't there, but I heard about this secondhand, where initially people who didn't know Eric were going up to the security guards and saying, "I think we have an Antifa infiltrator in the White." And little do they know that he's actually probably the most right-wing person there, because he's a full-bore anti-Enlightenment philosopher. It's absolutely incredible experience, and like you say, a really jolting experience, because when I knew of him through we have some bizarre mutual friends on Facebook. This one guy, Dominic Fu, who's just this Singaporean Anglican who's incredibly, again, well thought out. And we just sort of bump into each other on comment streams, really, on Facebook. And then I joined UKIP, and he was there in the Young Independents hub, and I was like, I know you. I've seen you before. Hang on a second. Interesting fellow. Was it? So I know that we're not quite reading out questions just yet, but I did see something here. Question for all of you in regards to the Boomer Millennial Alliance. Can Richard Braine be let into YI as an honorary Zoomer?
Are you aware of the term Zoomer, Richard?
Yeah, I am aware of it. Yeah.
I've
heard it. I don't know what it means, but I'm aware of it. And look, I mean, the point about this is that, you know, it's fantastic that we've got young people coming in. I mean, a couple of years ago, I wanted to do a video with David Curtin, where, you know, that was sort of a drama, like a little TV advert drama, where you see a family sort of finishing supper at home in a nice sort of middle-class home, and you can see the sort of slightly worried looks from the mother to the father, you know, and about their boy, you know, who's, let's say, you know, 16 or something, and you can see they're worried about him, and you know, they say, you know, are you going out tonight, you know, Stephen? And he is very suspicious of them, and he barely speaks to them, you see, and you know, and they then, the parents, when he goes out, the parents then proceed to have a conversation that's about, you know, why they're so worried and the sort of people he's mixing with and what he's getting into, you know, and all this sort of stuff. And then you know, it switches to him arriving at the pub, you know, and it's like David Curtin, and it's sort of alternative people of all ages, from any background, you know, like 5 or 6 people just meeting in the pub and talking about UKIP. And the whole point, and the whole point is, you know, it says the love that dare not speak its name. Patriotism. You know, the love that dare not speak its name is that it's okay to love your country, you know, and to meet with other people who love your country too. And you all love your country together, and you talk about how to make it better, and you talk about the things that are going wrong, you know, to your mind, and just presenting it like, you know, if it was filmed really well, like a TV, like it'd be a really nice little 30-second thing of these middle class, you know, 40 something parents, let's say, you know, who are part of that lost generation that, you know, through the sort of 90s and all, they haven't quite worked out how to find out their own information, really. They still just get it from mainstream media, and they still remember what their Marxian geography and history teachers taught them at school, and you know, all of their friends are, you know, left wing, but comfortably off and have good jobs, and essentially the sort of sneering middle class left, you know, and that's the background that child comes from. And you know, he is uncomfortable and he is alienated by his home environment, you know, not because, let's say, he's gay or something like that, but because he's actually a patriot, and he's not allowed to say UKIP at home over the kitchen table. He mentions the party, you know, there'll be a bad mood in the family for days and days, and there'll be sort of snide comments, and he'll be undermined and he'll be attacked, you know, in the way that we've all seen and become used to. So that's it.
So I think that's. I was just going to say, I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea of marketing, because what it does is it normalizes the concept of going, like, just socializing and talking about UKIP and the policies of UKIP, or just like politics that the left don't approve of. And I think that's a fantastic way. And I think a great way to end that little 30-second clip would be to, like, the kid comes back home and the parents find like a leaflet from like UKIP or something. And instead of like scolding them, they like, one of the parents just puts their hand on the shoulder and be like, I feel the same. You know, something like that. So, like, honestly, I think that would be a really wholesome way to like wrap that up, because I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think that's something that we could use in the future, honestly.
Creepy. You went too far. You went too far. It's creepy. You know, don't forget.
Parents do become wholesome. You know, some of them do it.
That's a bit American Beauty, you know, when the father sort of, you know, comes out to his son or whatever it is. But look, the point is that there's anger out there on a scale I've never seen in my life, and we need to harvest it, because the angry people are the people who are going to save this country, and we need to get through to them. And the way I conceive of that story is not offering a resolution. This is unresolved. We haven't left. It's 3 years, and my guess is that we probably won't leave on the 31st of October. And actually, we need to be in touch with people's anger. You know, we need to recognize, you know, how many people in this country are so sick of being governed and ruled and sneered at and spoken down to and deceived and misled and abused and exploited by our parliamentarians, all of them, and by our establishment, the media, the universities, the schools, the judiciary, you name it. There isn't a there isn't a German car driver barely in this country that isn't properly co-opted into this great treason of destroying the British Constitution, destroying the British history of reaching a satisfactory democratic system that brought about wonderful changes and a huge success that the whole world looked to as a place where you could find, more probably than anywhere else, fairness, decency, honesty, integrity, democracy, justice. And so we absolutely must harness that anger. If you have the parents saying, well, I feel like that too, you know, it's good, because they don't. Let's be honest, you know, they don't. The people that live next to Boris Johnson, or, you know, the Burkows, or the Greaves, or the Subrys, you know, or, you know, your university lecturer, you know, they are extremists, but they are a huge it's not a majority, but it's a plurality. It's a very large number of people who are extremists, and they see the others as the extremists. They believe that their view of no borders, one world, the EU, all of that is somehow an unarguable orthodoxy that only a madman or an extremist would wish to challenge. You know, they're unable to think outside that box, because it's not their fault. You know, they have been bombarded their whole lives with the EU's propaganda, and with vast amounts spent on persuading us all, you know, that that the EU stopped, the EU brought an end to the Cold War and all this sort of rubbish. And they've just been told that all the time, and you know, they've not had time to question. They've been too busy bringing up families, doing jobs, you know, important jobs where they have responsibilities. They have to think about other people. They've got to, you know, they don't have time to find their way through, you know, this labyrinthine lie that you know, that we're all being constantly exposed to. And so, you know, you can't blame people, but we also need to have a resolve. We need to harness the anger, and we need to bring about a real change in this country to deliver Brexit and to return to a true democracy where people really have control of government.
I like the way that sounds.
Absolutely. So talking about young people, what have you made of the introduction to UKIP of people like Sargon of Akkad and Count Dankula and Paul Joseph Watson?
I think it's fantastic. And I mean, when I saw that they had joined, you know, I was absolutely thrilled, because, you know, look, the press is desperately trying to paint them out to be what they're not. You know, they are people who are very interested in discourse and openness and political discussion and argument and the political process and democracy and justice. They, you know, they're good people, and you know, they're exactly the kind of people that UKIP needs to get our argument out there and support us and open up the discussion and get people to open their minds and wake up about what's going on. So I'm, you know, I really support it. I love it. I'm so thrilled that they're in the party, and I want them to keep doing their great work. I'm very worried about the fact that increasingly they and people like them are being censored on these on networks, on I say networks, on proprietary forums. Effectively, is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
and you know, this is a very dangerous and worrying development, and I'm very angry about it. I don't know actually what we're going to do about it, but we need to fight it. And I think Paul Joseph Watson's point that these organizations like Twitter and Facebook and so on are very happy to claim that they are public services when it suits them legally, and then when they decide they want to ban someone just because they don't like his politics, they then turn around and say, well, we're a private company operating a private forum, and therefore we can ban whoever the hell we like. And they must not have it both ways. And I think that we need to try to formulate policy and laws in this country to hold what are effectively monopoly online forum providers, to hold them to account and make sure that they have the the kind of obligation that the BBC used to have. Sadly, it was removed from the BBC Charter, the requirement to be objective. And that was, I think, a great tragedy, because, you know, one of the only good things that you can say about the BBC in the past is that many of the people that used to work there in the old days, you know, were deceived into thinking that they had the possibility of being objective. I mean, we know that the BBC banned Churchill from speaking on BBC radio between 37 and 39, and he used to have to go to France and broadcast from the northern French coast to reach the people of the south of Britain to be heard, because the BBC banned Churchill. So, you know, this isn't something new. But, you know, there was a time, I think, when BBC people thought they could be objective and they had the ambition to be objective. That's gone. I don't know how we bring it back, but it needs to be brought back for online fora as well, because they are just as important, probably more important than the BBC now. And obviously, you know, the UKIP policy to end to make license fee voluntary is crucial. But I also think we probably need to, I mean, sometimes the answer is to apply the law we actually have. So if you go and look in, let's say, monopolies law in the UK, competition law, you probably find that, in fact, organizations like Facebook and Twitter are already breaking the law, but nobody is bothering to hold them accountable for it. And so these are the things that we need to look at. I mean, as a libertarian party, it's always nicer to look at the existing law and say, look, the problem isn't that we need a new law. The problem is that we're not actually upholding the law we already have.
That's very interesting. Very, very, very sound as well. Yeah, because I mean, I don't know what it's like for any of you guys, but I mean, Carl Benjamin essentially going, you know, F it, I'm joining UKIP, was one of the final spurs for me to actually join the party.
Yeah, same.
And very much sort of like, you know, young people with some dynamism in the party are needed. Not to say that I'm particularly dynamic, but I was just a young person who happened to be more active.
Carl's 63.
Pardon?
Sorry?
Carl is 63. He just dyes his hair.
It's but yeah, and it was just this weird instance. I mean, I joined UKIP in late October, and on the 3rd of January, I got sworn in as the chairman of a branch. It was just this incredibly hectic time where they desperately just said, look, we need anybody. And I think that they thought that, oh, he's a young guy who doesn't know much about the way that the party works, so he'll be a safe pair of hands. And as it is, now UKIP Campbell and Redruth and Hale is quite active, and I'm going to the beat of my own drum in that regards. I'm not part of the fairly predominant purple conservative camp that does exist within, you know, a fair number of UKIP branches. I've definitely positioned myself, I think, on the populist wing, and it's upset a few people in the branch for sure. I had somebody on what was it, either my most recent or my second most recent monthly chairman's email that went round to the branch distribution list, saying, "Oh, I'm leaving the party. You should replace the pound logo with a swastika." I was like, okay, you know, whatever suits you, buddy. Like, like I'm just here looking at the Israel flag on my wall, going, yeah, that's definitely me, dude.
Are you sure he was being ironic? You know, maybe he was unhappy that it hadn't yet been replaced with a swastika.
I mean, that's also possible. Although the fun thing is, actually, I was kind of nervous before I went to my first UKIP branch meeting. I was like, oh, what if they are actually like a bunch of far-right nut jobs and I've really just sort of wasted 30 quid on a membership I'm really disgraced to be holding? And instead, it was just a bunch of lovely old dudes who just wanted to grumble about Brexit a touch and then go for a beer.
That was exactly my experience as well.
Yeah,
I found.
me too.
I mean, one thing I'd like to say about that is that don't forget that, you know, the party's been fighting for this for 27 years. So those old dudes, you know, many of them, I mean, I've met many people who've been in the party for a very long time, you know, if not, you know, in 93 or 92, but certainly, you know, late 90s. And many of them are still in the party. And they've done their time. They've put out more leaflets than you can imagine. they've worked hard. Often they've stood for the council. They've done all kinds of things. And, you know, often you wouldn't think it to look at them. And it's why it's great to talk to them and great to actually get to know the members, because you discover that they've had all kinds of interesting and worthwhile and amazing experiences. And of course, for those people, you know, the referendum itself, getting it and then winning it, you know, was a huge, huge milestone. You know, it seemed and still seems to be achieving almost the impossible. So, you know, after that, inevitably, there's a kind of, you know, we've worked so hard for all these years, we've got there. And inevitably, there was a kind of slump after that, because I think people, you know, I wasn't fooled, but I think that people just too easily wanted to believe that that was going to be enough. And so a lot of the people you're talking about, they've put in money, time, effort, everything over a long period. And you know, it's not surprising that they're tired, you know, and that's why it's so wonderful to have the injection of a whole lot of young people coming in, because we need to pass the baton on. We need to, you know, we're going to carry on the fight. We're going to have to carry on the fight. But, you know, remember that this fight has been going on for so long. I mean, Neil Hamilton joined I think it was called the EDC. Well, was it that? I think it was called something else. But anyway, he joined it in 1967, as he tells everyone. And, you know, but he's right, he did. And that's how long he's been fighting. I'm 51, and he's been fighting this terrible injustice for 52 years. So I wasn't even born when he started doing this, and I'm technically a boomer. So, you know, so it goes on generation after generation. It's taken a very long time to get where we've got to. We should be so proud of where we've got to. It's fantastic that you guys are meeting older people and, you know, understanding that they've got interesting things to tell you and talk to you about. And you know, I'm hoping that this bridge, you know, the Boomer Millennial Alliance is going to be very sturdy, and there's going to be a lot of traffic across it, and we're going to be a fantastic force together, wisdom and energy.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
I would like to say actually, there's a lot of younger members who first come into these branches, and quite often they're mostly surrounded by older people. And I know some of them kind of feel, you know, what can I do here? I'm a bit of a nobody, you know, no one's going to really respect me. But I find that if you actually show that you're willing to help out, and when people say we need leaflets delivering, and you say, oh yeah, I'll deliver those leaflets. Once you start doing things like that, they slowly give more credence to what you're doing and allow you to do other things, such as run the social media, etc., etc. And you start earning more respect within the branch. So I would say to the younger members, put the time in and show your worth, essentially, and you will get there to, you know, the higher positions.
I was saying that I was saying that to Damien before we started the streaming. That, you know, like, if you actually want to progress and do some stuff within the party, all you have to do is just put the time in and put the effort in. You know, it really doesn't take anywhere near as much of the effort as you might think it does. And the other thing I was going to say, I'll just say this one more thing. Is that Damien's absolutely spot on when he said, you know, if the branch asks, you know, can you do some leaflets or can you do this small thing for us? If you just say yes and you're willing to put the effort in, that does build up a lot of respect, and you gain so much experience for it. And like in my last committee meeting, like we'll see how things go, but it's looking like I'll end up probably being a kind of a youth correspondent for my particular branch, so I can try and bring in more younger members in that, because my pretty much most of my branch is considerably older than me, and they put so much work in, but when it comes to actually addressing the youth in that, they don't know that much. So having me on board, and the fact that I do correspond for the most part, not always, but for the most part with YI, and I relay to them what I know about YI to them. They're obviously acknowledging the information that I have, and it's, you know, the transitioning of information to them really does help, because it helps them to understand who they should be targeting. So yeah, Damien's absolutely spot on. You know, like, just if you're part of a branch, and you want to be active, if whatever the branch chairman's asking for you, even if it's just a small thing, just say yes, and I guarantee you it will do well for you as well as the branch.
Completely. And also one of the other benefits of having a broadly older membership, to the point where I'd say, Richard, at 51, that probably means that, as far as UKIP demographics go, you probably already welcome to join Young Independents. But one of the things I actually really appreciate is, so one of the guys in my branch, I think he's nearly 90, and like he's still spot on, but he can remember sort of the post-war prefab housing, and he said, well, we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and what we need is cheap, affordable homes. And so I started talking to him about the fact, like Nuttall wasn't a perfect leader, but one thing that was, sorely wasted, I think, in the 2017 general election was that UKIP was, I think, the only party to have a fully costed housing policy that was about sort of, like modular housing that was easily constructed, cheap, affordable, and reliable. And he was like, well, that just makes sense, doesn't it? And we ended up having this great long conversation about housing policy. And in 2021, Cornwall has its local elections. And I want to try and make sure that we stand as many candidates as possible this time around. And one of the big things that we're going to be talking about is social housing. And it's kind of funny, really, when you think about how sort of, the prefab housing idea, and generally when you talk about wanting to increase social housing, it's seen as a left-wing Labour idea. And, I actually think, Richard, the guys will probably tell you that I can bang on about social housing any hour of the day. I love to talk about social housing policy because I'm incredibly boring.
Go ahead. We love. I get a boner for social housing policy. Keep going. Look. Two things about that. Your generation are the ones who are finding it hardest to get out of your parents' homes, get somewhere to live, even think about buying a flat, because it's become so expensive, and the uncontrolled immigration has brought that about, and it's been very, very tough on young people. So your generation are the ones that have suffered most of this, and you're right to care about that issue, and you're right to make it an important issue and know as much as possible about it. There is one other point I wanted to make quickly when we were talking about, coming into these branches and some of the old timers. And don't forget that, what some of you youngsters may not realize is that a lot of the things that you can do on your phones or on computers or on networks appear to that generation to be magic. I mean, actual magic. They simply don't have any. There's people in branches all over UKIP that have never been on Facebook, that have never been on Twitter, that really struggle to use their 1989 remote control for their telly, because they're not interested in spending a lot of money on maybe don't have money to spend on new technologies and so on. But they're also just the generation that, just before me, really, where mobile phones, computers, that stuff just did not exist. It simply didn't exist. You have to imagine a world without it and recognize that a lot of those people come from that world, grew up in that world. And so what you guys could do when you go into these branches with, basic online skills is you can transform the branch, because that stuff hasn't been done. If you say, where's the branch's Facebook account? Where's the branch's Twitter account? And, do make sure you apply proper, rigorous, forward-thinking security. So make sure you've got 2 admins always. Make sure that the party remains in control of the page, even if you yourself get fed up and go and join some terrible, go and join the independent group or whatever the hell they're called this week. And but the point is, get in there, into the social media stuff, into the online stuff, and help the old timers spread their
wisdom.
Yeah, well, yes, but I think, wisdom certainly. And also one of the crucial things to do is get old timers using smartphones, because actually a lot of people who are older have got pensions. The one thing they do have is time. And I spoke of this last summer in Nottingham, but potentially if we can get older people in UKIP using Twitter and Facebook and online, all of the online, okay, Telegram, whatever it is. If we can get them all using that stuff, learning how to take a video on their telephone, learning how to upload it, learning how to do this kind of thing, then actually, UKIP's got an army of people that could come online and could start doing it. And many, in other words, target the 68-year-old to get a smartphone, help get them set up, help get them putting stuff out, and then the wisdom will flow.
Yeah,
you don't need to worry about what they're going to say, because they've watched politics in this country their whole lives. So equip them to get the message out there, because they find it slightly daunting, slightly confusing. That's all I want to say.
I think that's a really interesting concept as well, and I think it's especially pertinent for a branch like mine, where whenever I send out an email, my secretary has to print off about 20 or 30 copies of my email, because a third of my branch don't even have an email address. I mean, now I kind of feel guilty going back to talking about social housing, because I don't want to lead a brother into sin. I was just talking about how this idea of talking about social housing, which is often seen as incredibly left wing. Funnily enough, the conversations that we've been having, particularly around taking power away from central council authorities regarding social housing, local councils dictate who gets to use the social housing in their wards. Because I mean, the situation that we have in Cornwall right now is that there are actually signs up on certain parts of the London Underground telling homeless people to move down to Cornwall and Devon, because they'll get social housing. Because if you come down to Cornwall and Devon as a homeless person and bang on the council offices and say, give me somewhere to live, you jump to the top of the ladder. Meanwhile, homeless people in Cornwall and working class families trying to get on the housing ladder don't have anything. So one of the things that we want to propose with UKIP Cornwall is essentially a policy of devolving the authorities regarding social housing to the town and parish level. And ironically, even though lots of the more left-leaning members of sort of UKIP Cornwall said that's a really good idea, the guy who drafted it is a rabid Thatcherite who used to be a district councillor for the Conservative Party in Cornwall. And yeah, it's just this interesting way of because we are actually prepared to have conversations that essentially transcend party lines, because we're not so firmly on the left or the right, and we have lots of people coming from lots of different backgrounds.
Well, we're not ideologically possessed, as Carl says.
Yeah, because we're not here to just fight, doggedly for a single ideology. We're all here for one purpose, and we come from all different backgrounds around that. It means that we can have these conversations and we can come up with some radical ideas where sort of the lefty guy who wants to return to prefab housing and the Thatcherite who just wants, any kind of centralized authority to get out of his life can come together and have a really solid policy on social housing. I just think it's incredible, but only UKIP can have these conversations. So I'm just really looking forward to, 2021, where hopefully, Cornwall just goes purple, and we just destroy the Liberal Democrats, because they're the dominant force down here at the minute. And even though Cornwall voted to leave, Cornwall Council, which is led by a coalition of Lib Dems and Independents, passed a resolution recently saying that Cornwall wants a second referendum. It was just absolutely obscene. Where the majority of the people here are dock workers, fishermen, and people working in the last few remains of the mining communities. And the rest of it is, if you don't have tourist, seasonal work, you're unemployed. And those are pretty much the only things that people can work on. People want to change, voted to leave, and then a bunch of snobs up in Cornwall Council elected to say, we as representatives of the Cornish people believe that it would be in their best interests to have a second referendum, because the plebs don't know any better. And so
that kind of thing is really despicable, and it needs to be called out. And the answer is, you're right. Let's do as much damage to the Lib Dems as we can. But we've got to recognise that they are skilled at fighting targeted wards and constituencies. And actually, we need to learn from them. We need to get better at doing what they do. Their targeting is very effective, and their grassroots operation is very, very effective. And you may know, one of the things that I've been working on recently is a canvassing system, and I'm still working on that at the moment, and it's coming together. And the goal is that we're going to be sending people out to use this canvassing system and really get to know where our voters are, so that we can start to do the same things that the Lib Dems do, and try to deliver a few surprises in some local elections. I
completely agree, because I mean, actually, up until 2016, I was a Liberal Democrat. I was a Liberal Leaver. I was in the minority there. And yeah, I can remember the night of the referendum was the best night of my life. That morning was incredible because my family were crying and hugging each other. It was beautiful. No, I mean, literally, like, apart from my brother, who's a communist, and we don't talk about him. My family was just sort of, it was, you know, I came up upstairs to try and get some shut-eye just after Dimbleby said that we'd won it. My stepmom come out of her room to wake up my dad so he could go to work. And I was like, we did it, we won. And we all ran into my dad's bedroom. We're all jumping up and down and celebrating. And then I got a snotty call from the leader of the Falmouth Liberal Democrats going, yeah, no, so we don't really want you around anymore. But I mean, like, the Liberal Democrat grassroots ethic is incredible, because we used to see it on a day in, day out. We'd have like a parish council by-election in deepest, darkest Cornwall, right? And a Liberal Democrat from North Wales would drive down on a Saturday morning, spend 8 hours getting gobbed on by trade unionists on their doorsteps, and then come away from it going, well, I think that today was incredibly successful. We must do this again sometime, right?
Yeah.
It's just this incredible level of the grassroots dedication. And the thing is, that's how they work. And it's really successful, because everybody, you know, when it comes to polling day for a national election, say, will go, oh, I don't really know anything about the other parties, but that Lib Dem guy was really nice.
Yeah, they certainly do the groundwork well, that's for sure.
I know.
Yeah.
We need also to make sure that, and I think this is going to happen, you know, I've certainly got it in my sights, just to make sure that we've got great software for doing all of these things, so that we're fighting on all fronts, that we are knocking on doors, that we've got good leaflets, that we've got good policies and great manifesto that genuinely appeals to people, that we're properly doing the research, talking to people, finding out what they care about, and making sure that we appeal to them, that our policies really appeal, and also making sure that members have the medium, the channel to get that information up to the central policy and manifesto building team in the party, so that so that our manifesto is really current, and people read it and love it. And then, of course, all of the campaigning, including especially online, but also knocking on doors and getting that data out. And I think if we can get that all to coordinate better, it's not about having huge numbers of volunteers. It's about having just a well-organized campaign across all media, across all of the possible ways of communicating with voters. If we can get to back to that point, then we don't need to have huge numbers of people. You know, I always note that, you know, in branches, I mean, my branch has got about 120 members. You know, the number of people that will show up to a meeting is, you know, 10% maybe, 15 or 20 if you're lucky, but that's it. And, you know, there's so many reasons for that. Many members are not very mobile. They don't have time. They have so many obligations. You know, I'm always grateful for any amount of volunteering that anybody does. But in fact, these revolutions that we want to bring about can be brought about by tiny numbers of people if they get organized, and if they do it right, they make the right judgments and the right calls. And then, you know, you can do what was it Colonel H did? I can't remember. Was it Goose Green in the Falklands, where I think 50 or so, I can't remember the exact numbers, but 50 or so British soldiers captured, I think, 500 Argentinians by just sending a note telling them, you know, look, this is your last chance to surrender. And you know, it's actually about boxing clever, you know, and organizing well. And the sheer numbers are not the issue. The issue is, you know, who turns out? Do you organize well? You know, look, the Lib Dems love a by-election because they know that they can send volunteers from all over the region, and that they can fight it as strong as any of the other parties. even though they're a much smaller party. So
yeah.
I think that, we bear that in mind, get better organized. There have been some decisions, I mean, over the years in UKIP, I've seen so many decisions that I just thought, this is not being thought through. This money's being wasted horribly. This is an ineffective way to campaign. This is a waste of people's time. It's important to remember that leafleting and campaigning, quite often, it is actually about morale. Sometimes the purpose of going out leafleting or getting together is actually to keep members interested and motivated, and make them, sometimes make them feel as though they're doing something, possibly or quite often in a hopeless situation where there's no way you can win a ward or a constituency. But it's better to feel that you've got out and did something. I mean, that's why I was a borough manager in the referendum. I didn't think we would win. I mean, when I looked at the odds stacked against us, I thought it was impossible. But I was absolutely determined that I at least would be able to look myself in the eye and say, I did everything I could for what I believe in. And that's the point. We've got to stay dedicated, work hard, get organized, and do as much damage as we can to the other parties, particularly the main parties. One day, if we do that successfully, I'm certain that we can get back to the kinds of levels that we were at when we caused the establishment so much discomfort, and in fact wrong-footed the Tory government and forced Cameron to promise the referendum that probably instinctively he never wanted to happen.
Yeah. In fact, I think that if we hadn't had the referendum in 2016, given that UKIP only really cottoned on to the idea that local elections win national elections back in 2013, we really cottoned on to that idea.
2013 was the local elections that actually brought us the referendum.
Yeah.
So shortly after the 2013 local election results, the BBC published a page that said that if that result was repeated in the general election, then UKIP would get 25%, the Tories would get 26%, something like that. It was close, 23 and 26%, something like that. And of course, Labour landslide. And so that was what put the pressure on Cameron. Funnily enough, it wasn't so much the 2014 European parliamentary election, it was the 2013 local election. If you look at the timing, it was around the 2013 local election when Cameron actually said, right, we're going to have to offer a referendum.
Yeah.
And it was also a combination of people leaving the Tory party and joining UKIP at that time. But that's the pressure that we need to get back to. If we could get back to putting that pressure on, it will work again, and we'll drive the agenda again.
Yeah. What I'm trying to say really is that if we'd had a couple more local elections like that before the referendum or before a general election, then we would be seeing sort of levels of success kind of like the Liberal Democrats are, I think, where we could be sitting quite cozy with a good handful of MPs in Parliament. I think that the reason why UKIP sort of really started to backslide after the referendum is because we hadn't been sufficiently entrenched in local areas. We hadn't made safe seats, so to speak. And I know that's incredibly difficult, but I mean, the Liberal Democrats down here, Liberal Democrats are a strange one because they feel like they deserve Cornwall. And that's the biggest problem, is because it's historically, Liberal voting country. And I'm talking old school Liberal Party as well. I mean, completely ignore the fact that the local continuation Liberal Party works very, very closely with UKIP, and we're probably going to be running some kind of electoral alliance down here so we don't stand against each other. But they feel like they deserve this place because it's Liberal country. And essentially what needs to be done is to just wrestle that away from them.
So where could UKIP's home seats come from? Essex, somewhere like that?
So I think it's a mix of interesting places, actually, because everybody keeps on talking about, and I would be the first person to say that we need to start chasing the Brexiteer Labour vote, the working class Brexiteer Labour vote. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to put all of our focus into working class urban areas, because we're not a party of cities, we're not a party of the countryside, we're for the nation, and that's our tagline for a reason, right? And there are so many interesting places that I can at least look at in Cornwall, where you look at sort of these communities that voted for Brexit or have sort of strong working class backgrounds, and they're not all urban areas. You know, Cornwall doesn't have many urban areas to speak of. It has lots of dilapidated mining communities that, you know, are very, very strong Brexiteer places. You have, farmers have always been seen as conservative territory, but lots of farming communities in Cornwall have fallen on really, really hard times, and the agricultural subsidies haven't helped them. They've only slowed their decline. And so, like, we actually have all of these different places that we could work our way into. You know, I mean, for my sins, it makes me sound like a right political whore. But I've also been a Conservative member because I joined the Conservative Party.
Be quicker to say the parties you haven't joined.
So I haven't joined Labour because, you know, I'm not a shill. So I mean, like, I was a Conservative after the referendum. Up until I all got booted out because I ran for a local by-election and some tasty memes got released to the press. It's an embarrassing time. So one of the things that made me laugh was in the Conservative Party, this party that's supposed to stand for, you know, the farming communities. They're supposed to stand for the well-to-do parts of you know, towns and whatever. They never spoke to the farmers. They never spoke to the young farmers. They never even bothered trying to talk to young people. They would literally just do the rounds of so-and-so has voted for us in the past. So-and-so is a friend of the local MP. So-and-so is a friend of the local councillor. Right, that was a brilliant day of campaigning, wasn't it, chaps? And it was like, what? I mean, when we went out campaigning in the 2017 general election, some of the people who were recorded as Tory voters hadn't been canvassed since 2001. It was embarrassing. I mean, the only thing that's more embarrassing is the fact that I don't think there's a single branch of UKIP in Cornwall that has any voter information at all. So, I mean, any attempt to change that, Richard, really, I would be the most grateful. Just so we can have some, you know, readily available information that we can constantly update as well as we're knocking on doors. You know, I can go onto my smartphone and go, okay, so this person voted for us back in 2015. They're an uncertain, right? Because the Lib Dems had that as well, down to a point. You know, you'd have your all your printed papers of all of the addresses in that particular part of the ward, and you'd literally have things like yellow Tory. You know, so it'd be like they're a Conservative voter, but if there's not a Conservative standing, they'll probably vote Lib Dem. You'd even have like yellow nationalist. So these people are diehard Cornish nationalist voters, but they would sooner vote Lib Dem than vote Labour, say. And it's actually, you play the system like that, and it's this really up-to-date kind of, you know, just dynamic system of gaining voter information is what we sorely need if we're to have an activist force that is really, really reliable. You know, all you need. I mean, we were winning town council, Cornwall council by-elections with a team of 5 people just going out for 8 hours a day, 2 or 3 times a week. And it is possible. We just need to make sure that we've got the information as well as the handful of dedicated activists to do the job. I just went on a bit of a ramble there. I'm going to go switch the light and get my charger.
That all makes sense. The software that I've written for canvassing, we did use 2 months ago in a by-election in North Kensington, and we didn't use it to destruction. It was a bit like tanks in the First World War. It worked brilliantly, and next time we use it, we'll make it play, and I think it will gain us, you know, a % or 2 of vote share. I hope, in you know, across the board. So it's going to be useful, and over time, you know, that will build up as people use it. And I'm working on it now. We used it in that ward, but it didn't have a very effective login system. And because I want to roll it out nationwide for the party, it needs to log people in so that we can see who's put in what data, and we can incentivize people, and we can also make sure that people only get access to the local authority data appropriate to where they are registered and where they canvass, just for simplicity's sake, and also for, I think, compliance. So so that's coming out. It's working at the moment. The next thing I have to work on is enable it to slurp in the data from the local authority data that is provided to us as a party by local authorities about the electoral register during the election process. So it works. I can demonstrate it. I will demonstrate it to you, not on this channel, obviously. And we have used it, and it's fantastic. And it enables you, and it enables one person to canvass in a ward, pick one polling station, tell at that polling station, and then go out that evening and get the voters out who have pledged, who vote at that polling station. Equally, it works just as well for a team of hundreds. So it's I've written it to be absolutely minimal bandwidth, very simple and quick to use, big buttons. You use it on your smartphone. You look up an address, you knock on a door, you record the voting intentions, and then on polling day you use it for telling instantly. You don't need to write the numbers down. You can write numbers down on a piece of paper and put them in afterwards, but it's so quick to use that you don't need to. You can just put the numbers straight in, boom, next one, straight in, boom, next one. You're just tapping 3 or 4 digits for each person that comes by and then voted, and on it goes. So it's very, very quick to use. And then obviously 5 p.m. or whenever it is that you decide it's time to go and knock on doors, it quickly shows you your list of people who apparently have not voted but did pledge for us, and it'll take you through that list and in a good walking order so that you can go and knock on those doors and try and get those people out. So I think it's going to be a success. It looks, it was exciting using it 2 months ago, and it was fantastic, and we all loved using it because it's so easy. And it's going to also grow features. It's going to put us in touch with our supporters. There's plenty of supporters who are not members, and we don't necessarily have a good way of being in touch with them. So it's going to grow membership, and it's going to put us in touch with those who vote for us, even if they're not members. So I think that's very important as well. So that's the plan.
So is that ready to be rolled out whenever possible, or is it still in development in quite a big way?
It's still in development. I mean, I had a session on it a couple of days ago with Anthony, who's helping me, and he sits there basically managing me and making sure that I hack code out, because otherwise, the phone goes, the children come in. It helps to have a partner working on a project. And he also looks at the code I'm writing and goes, "Are you sure that's what you meant?" I mean, if he doesn't understand anything that I write, he challenges and questions it, which is very valuable. It forces me to make sense to him, as well as making sense, trying to make sense in the code itself. And it is very, very nearly ready for real deployment. So I'm just going to need a few more days on it, I hope, and then we're going to be able to send out an email to everyone saying, here's your login. Please familiarize yourself with this and get out now. Don't wait till there's an election coming up. Go and find out what the people on the electoral register think about UKIP now.
Well, that's good. I really hope that it works really well and that it's an intuitive system. Because I can remember when I was a Conservative going around some local elections, they just started to roll out this a similar sort of thing, a mobile phone app that Conservative activists could use to log information. The problem was, because it was something made by the Conservative Party, it was the clunkiest thing that I've ever seen on a smartphone. And even once you'd managed to sort of negotiate the system itself, the way that it was set up as well was just, it wasn't friendly for either the activist or the person on whose door you were knocking. Because the way that they wanted you to get the information would be to knock on the door, say, "Hello, I'm from the Conservative Party. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to vote Conservative?" And try and have like essentially a 10-minute conversation with a person on the door who doesn't really want to talk to you anyway. About, how likely are you to vote Conservative? Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to vote Conservative? Just list the main parties. Like, this is nonsense.
Yeah. Well, the longer the conversation goes, the lower down the scale the results are.
Exactly. They care about that. They're literally just there to be like, "Oh yeah, no, I'll either vote for you or I'll think about it or no," and then that's fine. I mean,
so these are tricky questions. How you just But can I just say, if I send a text right now to Damien to log into the system, How many of you are using your phones for this conversation right now?
I'm
I
not.
think
I've got my
I'm the
phone.
only one. So I think the other two are using their computers.
Okay, so what I could do now, if you want to actually see this thing, is I can send you a text now, Damien, to give you login so that you can go in on your phones and have a look at it right now. And then, the conversation that we've just been having about how you design a system like this, it will be helpful, and you may have good ideas about, what I'm doing wrong. But please note that it is in development at the moment. So that
Beta,
means
I believe, is the technical term.
What's that?
Beta, I believe, is the technical term.
No,
It's certainly beta. It may even be alpha, frankly. But I'm going to see while I'm logged into this conversation. Can I just unboomer me? What do I do? What do I do to send a text to you privately during this conversation? Can I do it?
I'm not sure if that's possible, to be honest.
It might be. It might be. I don't know. Press.
Wait a second. I'll tell you what I do is I'll do it by email. That solves the problem.
Okay.
Boomer methods.
No, real boomer method. Quickly, get me my pigeons. I need to send someone a login.
That's it. I'll send you a postcard.
All right. I'll say while that's all going on, because obviously the people watching the stream won't be able to see what's going on. Are there any small topics to talk about while this is happening?
I think now would be a brilliant to go through the comment section, surely.
Yeah. Do you have any comments, Michael?
I have been checking back previously. I will quick go through now.
I just quickly say that one of the guys who's been commenting, Preacher Bear, who described himself as I think a neo redneck. He's actually a good friend of mine. He's a pastor and elder of a church in Truro. We get on incredibly well. He's a full bore right wing man, and he said that the only reason he won't join UKIP is because you haven't come out strongly against abortion yet. I think that that's a fair cop.
Okay, I have a question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this because we got a similar response from Chris Hicks when we were talking to him. This is specifically for you, Braine. Will you be announcing at any time in the future if you'll be running for leadership of the party?
In about 24 hours, that question will be answered. I have made this fairly clear through many channels that I did not wish to stand against Gerard. I like Gerard. I think he's a man of great integrity. I think he's rescued the party. It was about to just fly straight into the mountainside when he took over at the beginning of last year. And I think that he's done a fantastic job, and I support him. And I want him to carry on. No leader is perfect. He may have made one or two mistakes. I think nothing irreparable at all. He's shown great courage on many different questions. I personally think that when Mr. Robinson was a political prisoner last summer, which I believe he was, I think it took great courage and boldness and daring of Gerard to actually stand up for him in the name of the party. And I'm proud that the party stood up for a political prisoner in Britain. And not only that, but our participation in the campaign to get him freed, actually was vindicated because after 3 months he was released. Why? Because he was wrongly imprisoned. We stood up for someone. I don't care if you like him or if you think he's a thug or whatever you think about Tommy. I think he's got great courage, but obviously he's no saint. He's made plenty of mistakes himself. But one thing I would say is I'm proud that I stood up to have released a political prisoner in Britain in 2018, which is such a shocking idea to me. And I genuinely think that he was in prison because he was in the business of exposing the hypocrisy of our lily-livered establishment, which is covering up these terrible crimes that Tommy brings to light. And so I think that was a bold decision. Obviously, people argue that in some ways it's counted against us. There's lots of arguments to be had about that. But I'm proud that we stood up for him and that he was released. So I think that Gerard has taken some very difficult decisions and got them right and taken them often for the right reasons. So that's why I support. That's why I support Gerard. Let me just try and finish the answer to this question.
Yeah, sure.
So if Gerard stands, and we're getting very close to last doors now because it's this Friday that is the end of nominations. But as I understand it, Gerard may or probably will make give an answer on this question tomorrow, finally, once and for all. If Gerard stands, I won't stand against him. If he doesn't stand, I will.
Oh, brilliant! That's a good answer.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, because I was just going to say is that, like, I think I'm right in saying that those of us on the stream at the moment are pretty strong Gerard supporters. We think very fondly of.
Yeah.
And despite all of, like, the criticisms that some people have said about Gerard and the choices he's made, I don't think there's a single person who could say that Gerard Batten is not a principled man. He's very principled. And he stands very true to his own morals. And if he does decide to run again, he will absolutely get my vote. That's for sure.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, I agree with that 100%. And so, you know, we'll see. And, you know, if he decides not to stand, I will be genuinely sad, because I think that he's done a great job. I think that he is disappointed with the results that we've got recently. I think he sets a high standard for himself. You know, he looks perhaps at what Nigel has done and judges himself against that, perhaps. But, you know, so I think it will be sad, because I think that he has the wisdom and the integrity to lead us further and to get a lot more things right. And so if that's the end of his era as leader, I think it will be a shame. But I will stand, and, you know, essentially I agree with Gerard on a lot of things, and I don't envisage, if I do stand, being I won't be a radical a candidate in terms of policy or change of direction. I think, you know, to some extent we could be a little bit more charming and a bit smoother and a little bit more media friendly, perhaps. But basically, I think that the position and the policy is about right. And what I will, if I do stand, what I will be trying to champion is a much better and more professional and coordinated communication inside the party, towards the outside and the voters, to the press, to you know, the online world, so that we actually look more professional and do a better job of representing our fantastic policies and fantastic manifesto and fantastic people.
Yeah, and the thing I don't know if Gerard fully appreciates, I hope he does, is that he was only interim leader for less than a year. Farage was leader of UKIP for about 10 years. He had a hell of a lot more time to fully establish himself and show to the public what he's really about. And I don't think Gerard has really had that real proper amount of time to really establish himself.
A big factor in that, and I think, is that, you know, Gerard has come to the leadership at retirement age, whereas, you know, Nigel came to the leadership as a relatively young man, you know, in his 40s. You know, reasonably young in politics. So, you know, probably he had, and I think I can't remember how old Nigel was when he first became leader of the party, but certainly, you know, much younger than Gerard is. And so I think that is a factor. So Gerard, you know, looks at it very sanely. It's not about how long you've done it. It's about how long you've got left. What have you got left in you? And, you know, Gerard wishes the party to succeed, and he wishes its members to succeed, and he wishes its policies to succeed. So, you know, he makes a very sensible and analytical judgment on these things. I've never seen him be particularly persuaded by emotional arguments or anything like that. He's a very clever guy with great integrity, and he will be making that decision based on that. He hasn't probably got another 10 years of real fighting energy in him for it. So it's academic. To some extent, the point you raise is absolutely right, but it's academic as regards Gerard's leadership.
And one of the things I really wanted to press you on, actually, is that you're very forthright when you talk about things like Islam and Islamic extremism, grooming gangs, etc. And that's something that Gerard very similarly was very open and talked very upfront about. Do you think that's important in UKIP, that we take this attitude of there are no go areas?
Yes, I do. I mean, look, UKIP is the United Kingdom Independence Party. And independence is a very important word in our party title. Obviously, primarily people think of that in terms of the EU and the undue control that the EU has over the United Kingdom. But there are other forces in the world that we need to be independent from. And obviously, the international socialism is a problem. We look at the success of Corbyn. We see what's happened in Venezuela, for instance, and other places in the world where the lessons of the 20th century are being ignored. So we need to retain independence from that as well. We need to protect the UK from international forces trying to bring about that kind of society, that kind of politics. Also, don't forget that one of the things that I think the UK needs to worry about from the independence standpoint is the ever increasing power of data centralizing corporations. Mm-hmm. So you look at a firm like Google, it really does have the power to have enormous influence over governments, especially of smaller countries, and to some extent exploit its power in those situations. So it's slightly in a monopoly sort of situation, but the problem really is that never before in history has the power of knowledge been concentrated in the hands of so few people in such a way that every single detail of everyone's life is immediately available to those who may or may not turn out to use it fairly or proportionately or even legally. So the concentration of data into the hands of the data holders is massively is a massive assault on the rights and power of the individual. And we're going to see that problem continue to get worse. Whether you're talking about, let's say, an Oyster card where Transport for London wishes and the data firms that it deals with wish to learn everything that can possibly be learned about every journey you ever make. And don't forget that the reason often for collecting this data is that they anonymize the data and then sell it legally. And the people who buy it legally then immediately refer the data to these corporations down in Atlanta, I think, is the center of this particular industry. The industry is called data re-identification. And they take anonymized data and they can put the names, addresses, and phone numbers back on it with an accuracy of about 99%. And so companies do trade all of this data about us. They take the names off, hand it over, and then the name gets put back on at the other end as a commercial service. And so the idea, so privacy's gone, privacy's dead. Every detail of your life, every transaction, every card bill, every journey, your phone is constantly tracking your movements. People simply don't understand the extent to which every one of us is being surveilled. And this is an absolutely historic change in society, in human society. And that is one of the most dangerous attacks on democracy and the power of the individual. So there are lots of things that we wish to be, as a country, that we should wish to be independent from. It's not just Wahhabism and the international growth of violent Islam. It's also a lot of these there are other attacks on our independence, and UKIP needs to make sure that we have a set of policies and a posture that guards against all of these attacks on the crucial building blocks of what we know from history to be successful societies: the individual, the family, the village, the town, the county, that sense of belonging to a place and belonging to a people, and building up over hundreds of years, many centuries, the community of having shared culture, shared language, shared endeavors of every kind, whether it's in business, in economic sphere, or any other sphere. Sports teams even, they all are instances of people coming together to build a successful society. So we need to guard against all of the forces that want to destroy that. Of course, I didn't mention the cultural Marxist project, but that's partly I lump it in with socialism. So yes, we need to make sure that we're ready to guard against all of these attacks on what we know to be the fundamental social good.
But on the sorry, just 1 second, Michael. But on the Islam issue in particular, there is a critique which I hear often by quite high-profile people in UKIP that we shouldn't be talking about Islam whatsoever. Really, we should just be talking about the laws such as policing and the justice system. And to talk about Islam is to sort of go down a rabbit hole where we shouldn't be going down. So do you think we should be tackling, or at least looking into, the roots of this extremism, or is it purely just a matter of, law and justice?
To be honest, I think that this is an issue of presentation, and I'm aware that people have different views on this question within the party. And it's a difficult question. Essentially, one of the major problems that we have is that our law is not being upheld as it stands, and we need to have one law, not three laws: one for British people, one for EU citizens, and one for those who live under Sharia, within a Sharia society. That's not good enough. We need to have one law of the land. Ideally, it should be completely blind to colour and those issues. I don't accept that it should be blind to religions. I think that, for instance, in Germany, I believe there's a ban on Scientology because it is regarded as essentially an organised crime, a religion of organised crime, which I think is arguable. And so I think that it's perfectly reasonable for a state where it recognises that a particular religion is being hostile and is trying to actually wage war against that state, to say no, we're not going to put up with that. And so okay, so what this is, so the real point about this question is, do you tackle this issue by saying, look, we're going to uphold our one law and we're never going to talk about Islam, and then the other people say, no, we have to talk about Islam because it is a crucial cause in many of these violent crimes and crimes of rape and abuse and oppression and so on. And I would say that I think ultimately, we have to allow for both points of view. I think that there are parts of the country where, the argument that actually it is fair to identify, let's say, Islam in in what's going on, for instance, with rape gangs in places like Rotherham and so forth. That in fact, if you refuse to identify the religion as being a contributory factor in that, industrial scale rape of non-Muslim children, don't forget Sikh girls and white British girls. So I think in that situation, it's insulting to the voters to not acknowledge the extraordinary fact that so much of that crime is actually carried out by Muslims, often Pakistani Muslims, and we see that in the newspapers all the time when they have these cases that Mr. Robinson has been highlighting, and also don't forget many others have been highlighting. So whereas I think there are other parts of the country where people are much more squeamish. I think there are parts of the country where people are so miseducated that they believe that being critical of Islam is a form of racism. And I think you'll find probably quite a lot of people like that, let's say in Islington. And, so let's say you're trying to campaign in Islington, then, probably it's better to actually deal with the nuts and bolts of it and say, we have a problem because of this, we have this kind of crime going on and we need to do something about it. Does that make sense, my answer?
Yeah, no, that's
in other words, I think it should come down to individual branches, individual campaigns, how they wish to present this subject matter. I don't think the party needs to take a strong view on that. equally, in our current manifesto, it states very clearly that when it comes to immigration, you know, we look, you know, we want to look very carefully at people trying to immigrate from countries that have a bad track record for. Hi, Charlie.
Oh, she's just muted herself.
Okay. You know, our manifesto makes clear, the immigration policy makes clear that we want to be very careful about people coming in from countries, Islamic countries, that actually have a bad track record on producing extremists and people who come here to kill and maim innocent people. And it would be totally irrational to have a policy that didn't highlight that and say, look, we've got a specific problem here with people of a particular, particular violent ideology. And we need to look very carefully at them and actually discriminate and say, you know, we need to be more careful with people who come from a background that has this bad track record. So I think that's all those positions are entirely rational, and I don't think there needs to become a kind of turf war within UKIP, where, you know, you're either one thing or the other. I think that people should talk about these things, and those who wish to make the point that it is impossible to deal with Islamic extremism if you can't talk about it should be allowed to make that point.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Sorry, did you want to finish that off, Damon? And I'll jump in with some
no,
questions.
I was going to say, give us some quick fire questions for Richard, and also Charlie. Yes. Charlie, since you've just joined us, hello.
Hi. I'm here.
If you want to ask, I know you know Richard already, don't you? Because you've had meetings.
Yeah, we met last week. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, oh, okay.
Yeah, I was originally calling him the Darren Brown of UKIP, but I've changed my mind on that. I think it's more like the Gordon Ramsay of UKIP.
Why is that?
You know?
You better start swearing.
You know, bobbing in, sorting stuff out. You know, the man with the plan, like, definitely.
Gordon Ramsay without the swearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a whole Christian stream, so none of that naughty language now, kids.
Although we're past the watershed now, so
yeah,
doesn't matter.
Well,
no swearing on the Christian Minecraft server, guys. Honestly.
All right, I got 3 questions here, and I think I'll probably leave it at that because the stream's been going on a long time. I don't want to drag on too much longer unnecessarily. So feel free to answer these questions, Richard, when you feel like them, or in whichever order. The first one is what's your take on the Dark Henry Bolton times? Because when he joined, it kind of all things went a bit haywire. Where's the other question? This is a hypothetical one. If you were to win the leadership election, the UKIP, which would be, who would you appoint as your deputy and chairman? And the final one is which I think is probably an obvious answer, which would be, what is your opinion of the EU army? And feel free to answer whichever question in whichever order.
The last one was EU army, was it?
Yeah. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think I got those. So I'll start with the last one. I think the EU Defence Union, as it should be called, because it's not just army, it's also Air Force and Navy, is very dangerous for Western Europe. Ever since the Second World War, NATO, since the 1950s, NATO has protected Western Europe, and the great majority of the funding for NATO has come from the United States. There are still, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are still 21 US air bases on German soil. Excuse me. And I think the problem is that clearly the intention in Brussels is to gain this military capability, so that Brussels can go around saying, look, we're a superpower and we've got this army. And by the way, if you Catalonia or you Hungary don't toe the line according to the rules that we've set, be careful, because we are armed to the teeth, and you cannot possibly sustain you know, a military invasion force. I actually do wonder to some extent whether the HS2 train system wasn't conceived. I think in the 90s, I can't remember the name for it, but it was one of the early EU projects, very much like the Roman Empire's road building scheme, which was really about getting soldiers to the extremities of the empire so that you could put down rebellion. You know, you cannot have a centralized government of an enormous empire, you know, properly controlling it all, unless you can actually send the boys in and smash some heads and kill people. So HS2, one of the concerns I have with it is that you look at the plan for where it came from with the European high-speed rail network or whatever it was. And, you know, from our point of view as a country, look at do we really need it, this sort of 15-20-minute journey time improvement? And what could you get with the 100 billion spent elsewhere in our railway network? And I think you could get quite a lot. So the question is, why has it been pushed through in this way when it seems to be such an illogical use of the money? And I suspect that this is the reason that, you know, the journey time from Brussels to, you know, the north of England for you know, some, you know, people possibly involved in putting down rebellion, that sort of thing, you know, may have been a factor in how they thought about this. I mean, that's speculation, of course, but, you know, when you're building empires, these are the things that you think about. It's quite natural. So let's leave HS2 aside. Let's look at how the EU Defence Union will destabilize NATO. My father got a Légion d'honneur about a year ago and was presented with it at the French residence by the French ambassador, and I accompanied him there. And to my amazement, Lord Howe was there, who was a Tory defence minister from the House of Lords. And so I thought, this is an opportunity, and I got talking to him. And you know, and I asked him point blank, you know, what should a regiment of soldiers do? What should a brigadier do if he receives one order from NATO and another order from Brussels? If he's wearing his European Union badge on his shoulder, as he will be, he may be British or he may not be. But the question is, how can you have two chains of command? And if you don't have two chains of command and NATO stays in charge, then is it really necessary to have Brussels in control of these things? So, you know, these are questions that have not been answered since the referendum. It's been clear that we've actually signed many agreements, and in the Florence speech that Theresa made, I was trying to remember the Italian city, but I think it was a speech in Florence that she made well over a year ago. Apparently, Theresa May said security 18 times in that speech. And security is a kind of, you know, EU euphemism word for defense. Although it's not just, of course, military, it's also police and intelligence as well. But she made it quite clear there was a lot of coded language in that speech to the European Union that, you know, nudge and a wink, keep going with the European army, we'll go along with it, we'll be a part of it. And I think that is an absolute disgrace, bearing in mind the vote of the 2016 referendum, when it is quite clear that the British people said, we do not wish to lose our independent status as a nation. And that includes having control of our own military and not having our military ultimately controlled by Brussels. We already participate in NATO. NATO has been vastly successful in many, many areas, and gets called in when the EU makes a dog's breakfast of things, come and save the day. And, you know, so NATO is what it's about. I think we need to continue with NATO. The US has been our great ally for, you know, in two major wars, going back 100 years. And we have this, you know, a commonality of language and understanding. And that relationship should remain very important to us. So that's why I'm very uncomfortable about what's been going on. I'm very uncomfortable about PESCO, and I'm very uncomfortable.
Sorry, what's PESCO?
It is the Permanent Structured Cooperation, is the backronym that they came up with.
Yeah.
PESCO is an agreement that we have. It's difficult to say whether we have actually signed up to anything or not, because like a lot of things that the EU does, it's actually done by stealth. So, you know, they write a letter saying, well, wouldn't it be nice if we did this? And then 2 years later, the court finds that that was actually a solemn undertaking. and that that happens all the time. The EU has proceeded by stealth in that way over decades. So we signed, I think we've signed something like 7 letters of undertaking or agreements since the referendum as part of this PESCO program, and that is a military unification program. And so it's not altogether clear, but all I can say is when I tried to talk to Lord Howe about this at my father's medal ceremony, because my father was a D-Day veteran, and my mother noticed that the French government was handing out Légion d'honneur for men who had actually served, at D-Day as as combatant, and so my mother wrote up and said, "Oh, my husband did this," and so that's how he got that extraordinary medal, nearly 75 years later, 74 years later. But so when I bumped into Lord Howe there, I tried to discuss this with him, and I noticed that quite quickly he got quite nervous, and I may have been somewhat forthright in challenging him or questioning him, but perhaps it wasn't the time or the place. But he looked uncomfortable, and he has represented our government in Brussels in these PESCO talks and PESCO undertakings. So that's what I can tell you. I'm very uncomfortable with it. I would like it to stop. I think we need to stop and make clear that we're part of NATO, but we do not wish to participate in be part of, let's say, a European command structure or an EU command structure is the main thing. But it looks like it's just going ahead, regardless of what we, the Leave voters, want or vote for. It looks like Theresa May's government has just gone straight ahead with it anyway.
Yeah, I mean the big concern, because I'd like to study my modern militaries a bit in my spare time, and the big concerning thing about PESCO is at the moment the British forces serve only one leader, and that is the Queen. That is whoever is on the throne at the time. That is ultimately who they serve. Parliament should get permission from the monarchy before they take any action using the military. The problem with PESCO is it essentially removes the Queen out of her position. It takes authority. That's the big, real concern with PESCO.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, did you want me to bring up one of the other 2 questions?
Yeah, sorry, I've got them here. I think I've gathered enough on that one. Let's talk about appointing a deputy and chairman. Obviously, as yet, I don't know if I'm going to be standing. I do have people in mind for these posts, but I don't think, bearing in mind that
it's not Eric, is it?
To stand yet. I will say it's not Eric. I can say that much. But I do have people in mind for this, and they are not going to be in any way surprising. We're talking about stalwarts of the party who've put in the years and know what they're doing. And I think stability and continuity are important. So I think if it came to to me standing and even me winning a leadership, then I certainly wouldn't be trying to rock the boat. I've met so many good people in the party, and the average quality of people in the party has risen dramatically since Bolton left, and so I think there's lots of good people, and I'm not worried about that. Plenty to choose from.
Please, Stuart Agnew. Please, Stuart Agnew. Please.
I love Stuart. I love Aggers. He's Aggers is just fantastic. He could do no wrong. I really love him. He's a great man and an inspiration. He's been an inspiration to many people in UKIP, and he is getting on. He's in his. I'm not going to say his age, but I believe he's beyond retirement age already, and so he probably deserves a bit of time off. He's been back and forth to bleeding Brussels every week for the last God knows how many years, and that's a pretty exhausting thing to do. So.
There goes my hope of having a UKIP will restore Rhodesia policy.
Things. There's a country. I mean, we can't get it. That's another long discussion. Zimbabwe is. Let's save that for another day. So that's the appointments. And then the first question was the dark days of Henry Bolton. So
yes,
I can give. I mean, I'll try to give a reasonably comprehensive answer to this. apparently I was on a training team with Henry Bolton at a training day down in Bournemouth, not long after I first joined the party. I think only sort of 6 months or 9 months in. Something. I think it was the day before the 2016 conference, in fact. And apparently I was in the same team as Henry, but I completely forgot it. He made no impression on me whatsoever. The next time I really became aware of him was in the 2017 leadership contest, because I got a link and it was to the website that he had put up, and it was littered, I'm afraid to say, with spelling mistakes and bad grammar and repetitive language. And so I thought, oh dear, this doesn't show UKIP in a good light. When leadership candidates are publishing not very well read material like this. So I edited it. And I took out hopefully most of the spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes and so on. And I sent it I emailed it to him saying, there you go. And he very kindly called me an hour later saying, thank you very much, Richard. It's really, it's really good of you. And I really appreciate the fact that you did that. That was my next impression of him. He then turned up unexpectedly because I sent an invitation out for our branch meeting about a month before the leadership actual vote or announcement, and so he turned up unexpectedly. He said, oh, I'm here. And in fact, Jane Collins had not turned up, so he came in and he spoke to my branch members. We only had about 10 branch members here, and he was very friendly. But I remember when he started talking that within about 30 seconds of him talking, I realized that I was actually thinking about my appointments for the next day. And hang on, this chap who's standing for leadership, and my mind's wandered off while he's talking, and I was like, that's surprising, because I don't often do that. I am capable of listening quite carefully to people. I try to listen to people quite carefully, but I realized that he had no ability to hold my attention whatsoever quite quickly. And in fact, when we had questions after he'd spoken to us all about procedure and kind of military talk and a lot of business bingo buzzword mambo jumbo, that sort of thing, I then said, Henry, why are you standing to be leader instead of chairman? Because it seemed to me obvious at that stage that he was a more appropriate person to be chairman of the party. He was clearly selling his organizational abilities, his abilities to run teams and people and so on. But in fact, I made my mind up that night that I couldn't possibly vote for him, because I thought, I thought if you put him on television, people will just switch to the other channel. And so I decided not to vote for him. When he did become leader, I then put myself forward to him a month or two later. I didn't really. I went to meet him along with Catherine Blakelock, who famously started up the Brexit Party, and we had an interesting chat with him. This was before the scandal had really hit, and about half an hour into the conversation, he said to me, will you be communications director? And I always, when people ask me to do something for the party, my default is to say yes, I'll do it, because I want the party to succeed and I want to give what I can and do my best. And anyway, but this went on for him about a month later. He still hadn't told anyone that he had offered me this role. But I thought he must have done. And I actually spoke to Gawain when I bumped into him at a press conference. And Gawain seemed to sort of flip like a switch. And he said to me, that's the first I've heard of it. And so obviously Henry had been making promises and taking decisions about who was going to be doing what in the party without consulting the NEC, and simply going around and offering people things on the spur of the moment, really. We then had a meeting where he told me that I was not going to be communications director. Okay. Oh. So and that went on, and then there were lists and there were committees that I joined, and there was all this talk and just organizational mumbo jumbo. And it became clear to me that he was a sort of Walter Mitty character who just had no ability to see through any project. It was just hopeless. He had no proper incisiveness.
He's sounding like David Brent from what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, not that I honestly, I can say this, that I think he was much more plausible than David Brent. He presented himself well, he dressed properly, he was charming and friendly, you know, I can understand why some people were, you know, let's just put it this way, put their faith in him. I can't really understand why Nigel supported him, because you would hope that Nigel will have a little bit more nous than to support someone who was going to prove to be pretty useless. And anyway, then when the whole scandal of Joe Marnie started hitting the news, and he kept going on the telly and talking about his love life. And you know, I think that there's a distinction here. You know, Carl made a bad joke 3 years ago before he was a UKIP member. You know, it really isn't a big deal. He said something actually, I think, less offensive than things that Jess Phillips herself has said. And you know, I think that's worth defending and just saying, look, you know, people say things, grow up. You know, he's got a lot more to say than that, and you're not paying attention to what he really is saying. Whereas with Henry, I think it was the opposite effect, that he just kept on making it worse and worse and worse. Every time he went on the box, it just got more and more contentious, and he just seemed more and more to be in a totally implausible character, talking about his love life and all this stuff. No one cares, Henry, about your bloody love life. You're there to be a leader of a political party, and you know, it's about policy and getting people to vote for you and getting it implemented. So you know, he just turned into a disaster. And then when I saw him at the Frimley, he was due to go to Frimley.
Frimley, that's where I live.
Yeah, and I went to a meeting there, and Henry turned up, and I said to him, when he turned up, I said, resign. And he looked like he'd seen a ghost when he saw me say that to him. And but he wasn't going to resign, and so we had to turn up to Birmingham, and I turned up to Birmingham and actually voted against him. And thank God we voted him out, because he was doing untold damage to the party, and he was replaced with the excellent Mr. Batten, who I think who has great integrity, and who may not have made, you know, every decision in a perfect way, but he's done the party a very good turn and a very good.
It was funny actually, when Henry Bolton came out, and you know, because the NEC, you know, declared no confidence in him, and then he turned around and declared no confidence in the NEC.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because I was a Tory at the time, and I was out campaigning. I may even have been for my own disastrous election. But we were in a rugby club car park, having just finished up. And we're all outside the car having a smoke break with the doors open, the radio cranked up, listening to Bolton just dig himself a deeper grave. Yeah. As he was saying, well, I have no confidence in the NEC, so I have every plan on staying on. And we're like, who is this guy?
You know, some people suggest that his real mission was to finish off the party. And obviously, you know, I will never know if that is true or not. I think any of us will never know if it's true. But certainly he was doing untold damage, and it had to stop. And I'm very glad we got rid of him. And there it is. That's the story. You know, I don't want to get to, but he was always perfectly friendly towards me. And you know, he may have many shortcomings, but you know, I don't have any animosity, except if his mission was to destroy the party, in which case he can go and take a running jump at himself.
Yeah. All right. Well, I feel we shouldn't take up too much more of your time, because I imagine you probably have a busy day tomorrow.
Yes, indeed. I have a busy day tomorrow. It's been a real pleasure talking to you all, and I've enjoyed it. And you know, keep up the fight. Let's keep going. I'm certain that we can come back. We need to build up our vote share, keep fighting for it, and then we can start to really apply some electoral pressure again on the issues that we know to be important about the future of this country.
Well, that's brilliant. I just want to quickly say as well, I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but I remember a couple of days ago we were talking about, we're so close to hitting 400 subscribers. I just checked, we have 411. So Richard, I guess you've just made our 400 subscribers.
Great, it's great, fantastic. Is that a record then?
It is for us.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Good. Okay. Thank you. That's great. Anytime. I've really enjoyed it. So anytime.
Oh, and keep us updated about the app as well, because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, that does sound really good. Yeah.
Damien, if you email me, have you got my email address?
Yes, I do actually. Actually, no. Sorry, you said
I'll send it
to
through
me.
now. I'll send it
Yeah.
through now, and I'll email you, links so that you can have a look at it.
Brilliant.
Would it be okay if it was passed around to a couple of us as well after it went to Damien?
I'm happy for it to go to those talking in this conversation.
That's fine.
Yay!
But it shouldn't go public at the moment.
No,
As I say, it's sort of alpha stroke beta software, so it shouldn't go public.
That's
So
right.
don't share it around.
Oh, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Richard.
Great. Good night, fellas. Thanks a lot. It's been a real pleasure.
Bye.
Cheers, Richard.
Bye.